Next week on Leaders with me, Francine Lacqua. I speak to Vimal Kapoor, the chief executive of Honeywell, about his family's reaction to him getting the top job.
Nobody expected me to get this far.
His advice for workers in dealing with the growth of AI.
Skill elevation is the name of the game.
And how he's learning about management today.
YouTube is kind of new way to go.
Listen and watch Leaders with me, Francine Lacqua, on Bloomberg Television or wherever you get your podcasts.
One question.
Here's why there isn't more fear in the fear index.
One topic.
Here's why debt is now a driving political force.
One succinct explanation.
Here's why Trump was able to demolish the White House's East Wing.
Join Stephen Carroll for Here's Why, the podcast that takes one news story and explains it in just a few minutes.
Here's why AI isn't taking your job yet.
Subscribe to Here's Why on Apple, Spotify, the Bloomberg Business app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Bloomberg Sustainable Business Summit returns to Singapore on July 22nd. Our 5th annual Asia-Pacific Summit will explore how business and finance leaders are shaping the next phase of globalization by strengthening resilience and driving a multi-speed energy transition across Asia's diverse markets. Join us for solutions-driven discussions and networking opportunities. Thank you to our summit advisor, Bangkok Bank. Learn more at bloomberglive.com/SBS-Singapore.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest edition of the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, formerly with Fidelity and now Noble Capital, George Noble.
This is 120 times revenues. And, you know, it's even if you look at the company's projection, I mean, they're already borrowing money. You look at the company's projection, they're going to be cash flow negative for years to come. And here's the worst part of SpaceX, which I don't want to engage in the Captain Obvious thinking, but the thing everyone should consider, and that is the staggered lockup the unlock that we're looking at. Okay, starting from next month when the quarterly earnings come out, 20% of the shares come unlocked shortly thereafter, and then there's a whole series of unlocks, 7% every 20 or 30 days. By December, 100% of the shares will be freely floating. The important point that investors should understand is even without any change in the fundamentals, when you go from a 5% float to 100% float,
Well, George, in the old days, when you would take a 2-hour lunch at Lockober's and you used to hold court there off the bar, but in the old days, when a company went public, it took its shares public and maybe they had a little stub they kept private. Now we're unloading 5% of the public. To me, it's manipulative. Should regulators step in and get the initial public offering market back to a normal segmentation?
100%. It's not a question of what's legal or illegal. It's just not right. Society is not well served by allowing this. Grandma's 401k is the exit liquidity for this manipulation. And I think the regulators are asleep at the wheel.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Week, and I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. Big news for the Seattle Seahawks. A group led by tech billionaire Vinod Khosla has agreed to buy the NFL team in a deal that Sportico says is valued at $9.6 billion. In a post on social media, Khosla said he was excited to be part of a great franchise. Linda Noskova, she has won her first Grand Slam trophy. The 21-year-old, she recovered from a second set meltdown to overcome Karolina Muchova in the women's final and become the third Czech woman to win Wimbledon in just 4 years. Today, Jannik Sinner and Alexander Zverev go head-to-head in the men's final. The PGA Tour continues with the Genesis Scottish Open at the Renaissance Club. Now, going into the final day of play is a three-way tie at the top of the leaderboard between Minwoo Lee, Robert McIntyre, and Matt Fitzpatrick. They're all at 12 under par. And World Cup action. Another two teams, well, they are on to the finals. England defeated Norway 2-1 in overtime at Miami Stadium. It was Norway's deepest World Cup run. And Argentina, they topped Switzerland at Kansas City Stadium 3-1. So now the stage is set. You have Argentina taking on England Wednesday and France battling Spain on Tuesday. And speaking of the World Cup, its so-called hiring boost, well, it has yet to materialize ahead of the June 11th kickoff of the soccer tournament. FIFA predicted the event could create the equivalent of 185,000 full-time jobs, primarily in leisure and hospitality. Well, instead, the latest jobs report it showed any pickup in leisure and hospitality jobs in May was completely erased in June, leaving the employment in the sector down by some 21,000 over the past 2 months. David and Christina.
How about that?
Lisa, we talk about this. Same with the Olympics. It's a talk a big game, but sports stadiums, it's going to be a big economic boom, and the results are very seldom that positive.
At least they didn't build any new ones.
That's true. That's true. We have a lot of stadiums in this country. We're doing okay.
Thank you, Lisa.
All right. Ahead of his first appearance in front of Congress, Federal Reserve Chair Kevin Warsh, the Fed is vowing to deliver price stability, even though inflation is still above that central bank's 2% target goal.
We also got some news there from Fed Chair Kevin Warsh about these 5 task force he's created on data and inflation and the balance sheet. Michael McKee, our Chief International Economics and Policy Correspondent, here with us in New York on set to break all of this down. Let's start with these hearings. You're going to go down to Washington. He's going to speak before the House and the Senate. This is really like one of the first opportunities we'll have to see him, I don't want to say skewered, but grilled by lawmakers about his plans for the organization. What do you expect when he delivers those remarks at the Humphrey Hawkins?
I don't think this will be an opportunity to really skewer him since he just started. Democrats will probably question whether his loyalties are to the president or to the Federal Reserve and the economy, and Republicans will praise him, no doubt. He is going to have a more difficult task than perhaps previous Fed chairs because he doesn't want to give anything away. He doesn't want to say we're leaning this way or we're leaning that way. So I would imagine he'll sort of run through where the economy is and say they're prepared to do whatever they need to do, but price stability is our guiding star.
Do you think we're going to hear a lot about these task force? Last time you and I were talking, we were saying they have these different topics, cover a whole bunch of things, and they can be used either way. If there's a policy that Warsh wants to implement but knows the president wouldn't like it, he could say, well, this is what the task force recommends, but it can also go the opposite way as well. It can give him some cover if he's doing a policy that could be less popular within the agency. But he named some names to these task force. I'm wondering if any of them stood out to you. And they seemed pretty interesting and like reputable names that the industry would be okay with.
Oh, they're all well-known policymakers or economists, and that plays well. The question is, when they report back, what is it that they can actually say or do, or what will he fall back on? And that'll probably be a focus of the questions is, when you get this, how are you thinking you're going to change the Fed? Some of it is the stuff on AI. I mean, who knows? What are you going to do with that? Balance sheet will be interesting. He wants a smaller balance sheet. He's got people on there, Bill White and others, who have argued for smaller balance sheets. So, yeah, he could use that as a push forward. But I think the bottom line on what we get on Tuesday and Wednesday is, if you were running a prediction market, you'd want to bet on the phrase, there's a task force.
There's a task force, which he leaned on heavily after that first Fed meeting. Going back to these names, though, I made a joke. You've got like a quarter of the Harvard Econ department there. You got Jeremy Stein, Karen Dinan, Greg Mankiw is on one of these task forces as well. But then there's like Doug McMillon, the former CEO of Walmart, Mark Andreessen as well. I think Doug McMillon's going to be working on data issues. Many of these are names that you know well through covering central banks. What do you make of those other names that aren't necessarily associated with central bank policy?
Well, obviously, Mark Andreessen is an interesting choice because he's been controversial, shall we say, over the past year. Doug McMillon, I think, as somebody put it, who knows more about electronic data gathering than the former head of Walmart? So there's probably going to be some good experience there. The question is, what do you do with the data that they're not doing now? Because the Fed actually gets all kinds of private sector data and tries to incorporate it in all of their thinking about what's going on. So I don't know exactly where that one takes us, other than perhaps they can build support to go to Congress and say you need to give more money to the statistical agencies.
Is there anything you think we'll hear from him in Congress that reporters like yourself, who's did an excellent job of questioning him at his first appearance, weren't really able to get to? Is there some long outstanding question that you expect Congress to address?
Well, I think the balance sheet question is something that really didn't come up at the press conference.
It's big. It's what, 6.7 trillion now?
So, yes. Yeah. And so how far does he think they can go down? How fast? And where would he leave it? Now, Warsh has expressed the idea of going back to what they call the corridor system, which is scarce reserves, and the Fed is intervening in the market every day to keep interest rates where they are.
What are the risks of that?
Well, the risk of that, well, there's twofold risks. One, it means the Fed has to be much more active, and two, it takes out some of the safety net that banks have right now with excess reserves, and the whole idea of raising capital to try to make them safer goes by the boards. The other issue is that if you have that kind of system, then you're going to lose a lot of jobs on Wall Street that are in the repo market and things like that, because you won't have the kind of trading that we have now.
Let me ask you about inflation. Kind of a two-part question. We got minutes from the last meeting. It seems like there was maybe a more hawkish tilt to those minutes, that there was some division among members of the policy committee on whether or not they thought they should raise rates at that last meeting, and Kevin Warsh's first meeting. The second question on inflation has to do just with what's going to precede Chairman Warsh's testimony on Capitol Hill. We'll get new CPI data. So I guess it's, what can we expect from those data next week? And also, what new did you learn about the policymakers' kind of perspective on where inflation is today?
Well, I think they confirmed the idea that they're done with letting inflation get out of control and not come down. They want to really push to bring inflation down. Now, the question that divides them is, how restrictive are they right now? Some of them don't think they're restrictive enough, and they wanted to maybe raise rates in June. And we'll still have that pressure in July. But for the most part, I think they're willing to leave interest rates where they are. And if Warsh can do that, that is probably going to be the biggest win he can get on behalf of the president, and no rate cuts. Now, in terms of the data, we're probably going to see a little tick down in the headline numbers because gasoline prices came down during the month. But now we're back in the same position that we've been forever of Groundhog Day, because now gasoline prices are going back up again. And so the July numbers, which we'll get in August, are going to tell a different story. So for the Fed, it's just keep plowing ahead with interest rates where they are, at least, and see what happens in other parts of the economy besides energy, and maybe you have to respond.
About half the members said they were pricing in essentially a rate hike by the end of the year. Is that not the case anymore? Do you think that they will hold throughout the end of the year, or is it just too soon to tell? I mean, there's so many uncertainties. I can't imagine trying to make economic policy. And this is one of the arguments from Warsh when it comes to the dot plot, right? Those forward projections are not always necessarily useful, and they can kind of be a wagging the dog kind of issue. But where do you go from here? And do you think that stands, that we're not going to see a rate hike before the end of the year?
Well, I was just looking before the show at the latest projections by the markets in terms of futures and interest rate swaps, and they're basically still pricing in 1.5 increases by the end of the year. And I think I would have bet you a week and a half ago or a week ago that they were going to stay on hold for the whole year. But now we're back at war again, and energy prices are going up again. And so, there is a chance that they're going to have to raise rates. But nobody really knows, and that's the hard part. I suppose if you're Kevin Warsh and you don't want to give guidance, this is a good thing for you, because you have no idea what's going to happen going forward.
I generally have no idea what's happening going forward.
There you go. International economics and policy correspondent hitting up Warp Go on the terminal here on a Sunday morning before joining us. Appreciate that, Mike.
Some excellent boots. I know we showed Caleb's footwear earlier, but all right, ahead. Food under fire. And one journalist took her experiences in war zones and made them into a gastronomical experience. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Dwayne Brandstetter, owner of Brandstedter's Kangaroo. For 27 years, my family has been protecting Cincinnati homes with expert roofing, siding, gutters, and windows. 3 generations strong, we've built a legacy of faith, family, and excellence. Your home is where life happens, and we take pride in keeping it safe. No matter the weather, we're out there, making sure your roof stands strong. Schedule your free estimate today at gokanga.net. We hop to it.
Brandstedter's Kangaroo.
When employers like 700 WLW and Cintas choose Delta Dental of Ohio, employees can access the nation's largest selection of individually contracted dentists, and they get the care they need from the dentist they prefer.
This is Jennifer Mueller, Vice President of Human Resources at Cintas. We believe in offering our employees the best in benefits, and that's why we offer Delta Dental coverage.
Delta Dental, building healthy, smart, vibrant communities for all. DeltaDentalOH.com.
Changes everything.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest edition of the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast, a conversation with George Ferguson, our senior aerospace, defense, and airlines analyst, on earnings from Delta Airlines.
Delta United and to a lesser extent American are going to probably be the best part of the story this quarter. And I think Delta showed some resilience in the revenue lines, right? And I think, you have to remember this is a pretty diversified from a revenue standpoint company. They have maintenance business that brought in some great double-digit gains. They had cargo, they had loyalty that all sort of brought in gains, and basic lagged a little. But I think generally the story was pretty good on the revenue front. They grew less than United and American, so I think that means they could support some of those higher fares. They were like at 1% seat count growth. We're going to see United, I think, come in closer to 6. We're going to see American around 3-ish. So I think this might be the best part, again, of the revenue story for U.S. airlines as we get into this earnings season. And one of the challenges, I think, too, in growing a little slower on the capacity front is that some of their costs ballooned a little bit. But look, again, I think they made some good ground. They haven't totally compensated for higher fuel prices.
How is a cabin changing within the industry these days?
They're focusing on the well-heeled consumer. You're a retiree, and again, I think, Delta has shown some success on that front. And I would expect you're going to see the same out of United and American, but to a lesser extent.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Christina Ruffini alongside David Gura. Around the world, numerous wars and conflicts are destroying the day-to-day lives of many civilians. And one blog has gone to try to unite what pulls us all together in these hard times. What is that force? Well, it's food.
Food Under Fire is a blog dedicated to the proposition that amazing food can be found on the road, even in the farthest flung, craziest corners of the world. We sat down with the creator of Food Under Fire, that's Erin Lyle, to ask her how she came up with this idea for a blog.
Well, I've been long obsessed with food, obviously. And I moved to London 12 years ago for CBS and started covering conflicts once I moved here. And one of the first conflicts I went to was in Ukraine. It was 2014 and the revolution was happening in the Maidan. And what was amazing about it was freezing outside. All these people were out there kitted out in colanders on their head and mattresses as sort of shields. And there were little old ladies wandering around the square, pushing around carts of hot soup, handing out hard-boiled eggs, dishing out big bowls of grains. And I was going, oh my God, like this is how you feed a revolution. And it's as fascinating as the actual revolution that we're watching here. So I started this food blog because I think people generally find it fascinating how we feed ourselves, how we bring ourselves comfort, how we survive in areas that are under siege, that are difficult to live in. And so I started about 12 years ago. And now every time I travel, I try to find a very specific moment to blog about that will sort of shed a bit of light on something we don't actually get to cover as we're telling news stories.
So we've been talking about Ukraine. Give us a favorite moment or meal that you've had elsewhere in the world.
Elsewhere in the world, I mean, I've had some amazing experiences in Gaza back in sort of 2014, 2019, before this current conflict, where we got invited into people's homes and all the women cooked for days, giant platters of meat and rice. And they took us to their watermelon farm and we cut open a fresh watermelon and we ate it with sort of those big tins of salty white cheese that you'll find in kind of Arabic markets, and some mint and some fresh bread. And, you sit in these environments having this shared experience with people and just go, oh, wow, like life is happening all around. It's not just war all the time. It's not just destruction. There, people are sharing themselves, sharing their love. And I've been lucky enough to sort of stumble into those kinds of experiences in most of the places we go.
Do you find that some of the poorest, most destitute places, they're the most generous with what they do have to offer? I'm always surprised by when you go to really wealthy countries, that's not the case. And when you go to places where you think people are just surviving day to day, they're almost always the first ones to invite you into their homes.
Yeah, the Anglo-Saxon world is probably the worst at this kind of hospitality. But the Middle East, Ukraine, will go to these places where people have lost so much. And it doesn't even have to be war. It could be a natural disaster. It could be Haiti. And suddenly they're cooking everything they have. They're inviting you to sit at the table, and they're giving everything they have, even if it's not a lot. And it's such a privilege to get to experience those kind of moments. And when I was in Ukraine, when the city of Kherson was liberated from Russian occupation, and we were trying to get into the city. We got as far as the city limits, and then they wouldn't let us in. And it was too far to drive back. So I just stopped this old man in the street and said, is there a guest house in this village that we can stay at? And he said, well, you're staying at my house, obviously. We have food, we have blankets, and we have lady wine for you.
What is lady wine?
I mean, I'm sold at wine, but what is lady wine? And he's like, well, it's slightly softer for the ladies, so it's, not too hard for you. I said, great. So we went to their house, and this little old couple cooked everything they had in their kitchen, like giant bowls of pasta, canned, marinated tomatoes and peppers, a big bowl of pickled cabbage, little toasts with pork fat on them and sliced sausage and more pickles, and then giant jugs of homemade lady wine and vodka and male wine, I guess. And it was just, it was such an experience because, also for them to be able to host people after, 6 months of occupation, to be able to unload the trauma that they had lived through and have this captive audience sharing the moment with them and sharing the joy. And it was one of the highlights of my life, not to mention my work,
You've been doing this for more than a decade, and I'm curious what you've learned about your readers. Who's coming to you? What kind of interactions have you had with folks who are reading your updates and your dispatches on your blog?
I get readers from all over the world, mostly America, UK, because I write in English. But I think people really connect to these stories in a way that they don't connect to sort of a television package about what's going on in a war zone, because they can put themselves in it. There's a real empathy driver there when you're reading about what it's like in someone's home, or even how soldiers are living on the front line. They're living in a trench, but in that trench, they've got a makeshift kitchen. They've got soup on the stove. They're ladling out grains, and you can really imagine what it's like to be in the situation. So I do get a lot of feedback where people just go, wow. And also this, in the same vein as you just said, people are continually impressed with the generosity and hospitality that we stumble into around the world. It's beautiful, really.
Erin Lau, the blog is Food Under Fire, and sounds like a great topic for a book. I'm just saying. Thanks so much for coming on. It's nice to see you.
We talked about memorable meals. You wanted to bring up this pork that you have to eat in Ukraine all the time.
Yeah,
memorable in its own way.
It is. It's not bad, but it's very Ukrainian and Polish, and it is like toast with slices of raw pork, and it starts almost every meal. Erin had it on her blog, and I got a visceral reaction to it because I don't eat a lot of meat. I certainly don't eat raw meat.
Raw meat.
And
raw pork.
But when these people are offering you stuff, you don't want to say no. So and also you're very hungry because you've been in the field all day. It takes some getting used to, but it is nourishing, and it's good when it's freezing outside. What's the best meals you guys have ever had on the road?
That's a great question.
I don't know. I never know where to go. That's my whole thing. We're doing a last-minute trip to Puerto Rico, and I'm Googling all the different restaurants, where to go.
I was gonna say, I always ask the cameraman, but if it's a vacation, I can't help you, David.
The blog is very cool. I'm going to think about it. I'll tell you next week.
All right, speaking of next week, thank you for joining us this week on Bloomberg This Weekend. Join our colleagues in Asia this evening when markets kick off at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'm Christina Ruffini.
I'm David Gurr with Lisa Mateo. See you next Saturday.
Broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, an update from our partners at ABC News.
From ABC News, I'm Brian Clark. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina has died at 71, and his fellow South Carolina Republican Tim Scott tells ABC.
America lost a statesman, but I lost a friend.
Senator Chris Coons, a Democrat from Delaware, tells ABC there was no better friend but no tougher adversary than Graham, and he said the two had just discussed a bill that would implement new sanctions on Russia.
Lindsey told me that President Trump had just said to him he would support the bill, and it's my hope that we will take up and pass this bill in Lindsey's memory this week when we all get back to session.
And ABC's Stephen Portnoy in Washington says the foreign policy focus lines up with Graham's career.
He was a national security hawk, a fierce critic of Iran and supporter of Israel and Ukraine. In fact, Lindsey Graham had just completed his 10th trip to Ukraine on Friday. The Israeli prime minister says Israel has lost one of its greatest friends. Graham's sudden death at 71 after a report of chest pains is shocking news here. He was running for re-election this November. He was due to appear on Meet the Press this morning.
South Carolina's governor will appoint a replacement. South Carolina Republicans will choose a new candidate for November's election. Meanwhile, there are still outstanding questions about the status of another prominent Senate Republican, Mitch McConnell. ABC's Jay O'Brien has more.
McConnell was checked into the hospital exactly 4 weeks ago today. His staff has still not said why. It's an unknown medical condition. His office continues to say that McConnell is getting treatment and that he's working on Senate business. The governor of Kentucky is demanding answers about McConnell's condition. And if McConnell continues to stay out and with Graham gone, that creates a numbers problem for Senate Republicans. They go from 53 voting Senate Republicans to just 51.
Iran says the Strait of Hormuz is closed. The U.S. says it's open as the two countries have traded fire as the peace deal remains in jeopardy. You're listening.
Now, Bloomberg Radio weather on Sirius XM 121.
We'll likely see some travel problems later this afternoon into and out of the Little Rock area. Temperatures in Little Rock are going to be near 91. Showers, thunderstorms will also cause problems this afternoon and into the evening around the New Orleans area. Temperatures in New Orleans should be near 92. If you're headed to or from Charlotte, there may be some showers and thunderstorms mid to late afternoon that start to produce delays. Temperatures in Charlotte are going to be near 91. Those of you headed to or from Raleigh, watch for showers and thunderstorms producing some afternoon delays. Temperatures in Raleigh near 93. Nashville may be another trouble spot this afternoon with scattered showers and thunderstorms. The temperatures in Nashville near 86. Look for problems to start to develop sometime this afternoon in the Atlanta area due to showers and thunderstorms, 90 in Atlanta. I'm Rob Carolyn, and that's your Bloomberg Travelers Forecast. Now back to the latest headlines from ABC News.
The Rocky Mountain region could see record high temperatures today. Meanwhile, parts of the South have been inundated with heavy rains and flash flooding over the weekend, says ABC meteorologist Samara Theodore.
Flash flooding and heavy rain inundating the country, from the heartland to the south, stretching to the East Coast. New Orleans submerged, cars stuck in the deluge, people forced to wade through several inches of water. Come on, y'all, keep up! The floods turning streets into rivers. Over in Tennessee, a separate system dumping 6 inches in some areas.
I'm just thankful we're alive.
People in Houston continuing to demand justice for the Tuesday killing of a man that ICE agents mistook as the target of an investigation, says ABC's Jacqueline Lee.
ICE officials claim Salgado Araujo rammed a federal vehicle during an attempted arrest and ignored commands, that he was allegedly shot in self-defense.
Let the investigation play out. If the officers acted outside policy or illegally, they'll be held accountable.
But an attorney for 2 witnesses say this is not true.
They confirmed that at no point was there ever an ICE agent directly in front of the vehicle.
According to DHS officials, there were no body or dash cameras that captured the shooting.
The World Cup semifinals are set, and it's the top 4 teams in the world as the last 4 standing. England will play Argentina on Wednesday in Atlanta, one day after France and Spain meet in Dallas. I'm Brian Clark, ABC News.
And I'm Monica Ricks in the Bloomberg newsroom. Here are some of the stories we're watching. Crude oil futures close lower ahead of the weekend, but could soar to start the trading week as the U.S. ramps up attacks on Iran in the Middle East. Iran's declared the Strait of Hormuz closed until further notice and launched assaults on at least 5 American allies across the region. Those retaliatory attacks are now casting significant doubts on imminent peace talks to end the war. The hiring boom expected from the FIFA World Cup in the U.S. may not materialize after all, with payrolls and employment in the leisure and hospitality sector down by some 21,000 over the past 2 months. Expensive hotels and ticket prices have raised concerns about the eventual boost, with geopolitical tensions, higher airfares, and other barriers potentially limiting international travel. Fed Chair Kevin Warsh is set to testify on Capitol Hill over 2 days this week, beginning with an appearance before the House Financial Services Committee on Tuesday. Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet has details.
We know what Warsh will say in the central bank's semi-annual monetary policy report to Congress. It was released Friday in Washington. What we don't know is how he will respond to questions on a range of topics from lawmakers. The report is the first under the new Fed chair, and it sends an upbeat message about the economy. It describes growth as solid and productivity as strong while finding little sign of risk in the banking system. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
Earnings season also kicks off this week with reports expected from J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Goldman Sachs on Tuesday. Morgan Stanley reports on Wednesday. And we should get some economic data, including the June Consumer Price Index, retail sales data, and production, inflation, and jobs numbers. Jobless claims are expected to remain pretty flat this month. A group led by tech billionaire Vinod Khosla has agreed to buy the Seattle Seahawks in a deal that's expected to set an NFL record. Terms haven't been disclosed, but Sportico values the deal at $9.6 billion. Owners are said to be meeting in late August to approve it. And as we've been reporting, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham has died, according to his office, from a brief and sudden illness. Graham served in the Senate for more than 2 decades and had been in Ukraine as recently as Friday before returning to Washington. He was 71 years old. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg.
Wall Street prepares for the latest read on inflation.
Overall inflation continuing to climb for consumers.
Will core CPI rise and raise concerns about a Fed rate increase?
Is it a sea change for the rates are going higher crew?
Instant reaction on Bloomberg surveillance.
In line with expectations, but it's higher.
Inflation in Focus. Tuesday morning at 8:30 Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. And always on Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything. Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Podcast Spotlight Hour on Bloomberg Radio.
I'm Michelle Hussein, and you're listening to some highlights of the Michelle Hussein Show podcast on Bloomberg Radio. This week, it's the political commentator and podcaster Steve Richards about the UK's upcoming change in leadership.
The last few weeks have been kind of spellbinding. Andy Burnham won a by-election, he became an MP, and within weeks of that, he's going to be Prime Minister. We're in an extraordinary period, and because it's moving so fast, you can lose how astonishing it is.
Steve Richards, podcaster and UK political commentator. Nigel Farage has definitely been an actor in this Labour drama, hasn't he?
Reform have been ahead in opinion polls in Britain for a long time now, and part of his task is to turn that round. I think what he will try and do is become the figure. All those who want to stop Farage becoming Prime Minister feel okay about coalescing around.
From Bloomberg Weekend, this is the Michelle Hussein Show. I'm Michelle Hussein. We did a UK politics episode here a few weeks ago, but so much has happened since that it was time to return. A new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, looks set to soon be seen walking up Downing Street and taking the reins of power. Part of the background to that, the Labour Party deciding to replace its leader mid-term, has been the rise of Nigel Farage. And this has been a week when he has again dominated the headlines. There's been scrutiny of his donors, his benefits, his property portfolio. And he has responded to that by calling for a rerun of the contest for his parliamentary seat. So there is a lot happening in British politics right now. Labour is hoping to look refreshed and revived through bringing in Andy Burnham, someone who was until recently the mayor of one of England's great cities. I interviewed him when he was in that role in Manchester. He talked about his ambition, his responsibilities, his sense of mission. He was very far then from being a national leader. I've been thinking too of the change in Keir Starmer's fortunes. From the moment that we stood together on a TV debate stage days before the last UK general election, only 2 years ago, but he had the wind in his sails then. He was the coming man. Taking us through all of this is Steve Richards, longtime political commentator and now podcaster, host of Rock and Roll Politics, a podcast with a loyal army of listeners who he calls the Cooperative. Steve is particularly knowledgeable about Labour politics and leaders. He's the author of many books. Some of them were on the table when he came into the studio, and I've put details in the show notes. And do have a look at bloomberg.com/Michelle, because that is where you will find my notes and reflections on each and every episode, including what I read before and after the conversations. And this time with Steve, we begin with his writing and a very early observation of British politics. I'm sure we're going to talk about characters in the present day, one in particular.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a great story that you share about Wilson and seeing him have an egg thrown at him and the way he responded to it.
Yeah, it's an absolutely, for me, a moment where politics came alive. I was there.
Yeah.
And I was very young, and it was just so exciting.
And
it was electric.
Effect, it seems to bring him alive.
He was
such a horrible experience.
Horrific. He looked about 90, and this happened, and he changed, became about 30 years younger, and the whole mood of the hall changed. And I was about 10 or 11, but I found it fascinating. I can do it with the Harold Wilson impersonation, but it will be lost on most of your audience.
God, share it with me now, though. I want to hear it.
So he sort of looked up with this egg down him and said, "Now, here we have 6 months of a Labour government, which goes to show you could only afford to throw eggs under a Labour government." And the whole audience laughed and erupted. And Wilson looked about 50 compared to 90. And it's the humour as a power of leadership.
And the presence of mind.
And to act quickly. Yes. Exactly right.
Because he's before the social media era, but hearing you describe that, I can imagine him in the era of being doorstepped with a camera and having phones in your face all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Steve, I wanted to start with the theme of your latest book, Turning Points, because it is about moments of crisis or change. Some of them are British political crises. Some of them are international, the decision to go to war in Iraq, the pandemic, the global financial crash. But it made me wonder about something relating to now. Technically, what we're about to see is effectively a handover from one Labour Prime Minister to another. But do you think it could be more than that? Do you think that this transition could actually be a turning point for Britain?
I think it could, and it's not automatic. When there is a change of Prime Minister mid-term, the external challenges remain the same. A lot of the government remains the same. But in this case, the rise of Andy Burnham, it could be, because he has got a very clear agenda for what has gone wrong with the British state and how Britain is governed, and how he wants to put it right. Now, if he, and it's a big if he implements his plan, this will be a turning point. And no one quite knows in advance how a prime minister is going to perform. But certainly his ideas, partly learnt from when he left Westminster many years ago, has the potential to be transformative.
This great rebalancing of power, the biggest rebalancing of power in British history or recent British history, which he has stated. Now, we don't have very much detail on that, and I have, and you have much more than me, heard people who are about to lead or want to lead, making these big speeches. I'll reduce welfare spending. I'll build more houses. But you think there is something more fundamental that he wants to do?
Yeah. So one qualification in British politics, quite often, leaders who are about to become prime minister, whatever the context, often claim their big idea is a change in the way power is exercised. I think the difference here is Andy Burnham means it. I think his experience of being a mayor of Greater Manchester, where he saw certainly in transport, the power of local leadership translating into an actual policy development, means that he thinks this is a way forward. And I think he's got views also on the way the British state has become pretty dysfunctional more widely beyond the need to devolve power. He calls it the outsourced state. A lot of Britain is run by unelected agencies and private companies, and the paths of accountability and responsibility are so blurred. It's very hard for a government to get anything done. Now, how he finds the money to deal with this is a huge, huge question.
And we're going to dig into all of that, the ideas and how to implement them and what they'll cost. But I want to talk for a moment about how the UK got to this point in time, where a prime minister who won a huge majority less than 2 years ago ends up being booted out by his own party. Now, you're really plugged into Labour politics in particular. Your son-in-law are both MPs. Your daughter is a political advisor too. When did you first start hearing that Starmer was in serious trouble with his own MPs?
Well, not from any of them.
I find that hard to believe.
No, seriously.
They're careful what they tell you in case it ends up on air.
Really, really careful. I think they see me as an irritant, to be honest, because I just have my own views. I mean, and my view is that he was in trouble from quite early on. Leadership requires sort of titanic qualities, and he came into politics very late and didn't have many of those titanic qualities. He had a few: resilience, when he chose to have a dogged attention to policy detail. But I don't think he understood how you had to work a government, how to liaise with his MPs who became antagonistic quite early on. Some of them anyway.
Should Starmer ever have been leader of the Labour Party then? What would you give him credit for?
Well, on one level, it's fascinating because here is someone who not only led Labour to a victory, but a landslide election victory. And Labour don't win many general elections in Britain. So that was an achievement. There's no doubt about it. And if you step back from all the noise, there were also policy reforms of some considerable significance. The National Health Service is in a better place now, measurably, than it was. And I think the economy is more stable than it was. But, to be honest, after the 14 years of pretty wild rule, the Liz Truss premiership, the Boris Johnson premiership, I think the anti-Tory mood was set. And he'll hate me for saying this, but the degree to which Keir Starmer brought about that victory is questionable. I think Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and others helped Labour return with that landslide majority.
They lost the election. The Conservatives lost the election rather than Labour winning it. He did, however, transform the party in the minds of those who were very against it during the Jeremy Corbyn years. And that period, Andy Burnham sat out because he was running Greater Manchester in that time. Is that an achievement, in your view, that Starmer did put the party in a position where people who had turned against them completely...
It was partly an achievement and partly a problem. Here's why. The achievement was, very quickly, he took control of the Labour Party. The Labour Party is really hard to control. And I see Neil Kinnock, who led Labour in the 1980s and really had to change Labour from the doldrums of absolute election slaughters. And Neil Kinnock says to me, I won't use the swear words he put in as well, but he said, how the hell did he do this? It took Neil Kinnock 9 years. Very quickly, Keir Starmer had the levers of power in the Labour Party. However, in the way he became a very authoritarian leader, expelling people who challenged what he and his then chief advisor, Morgan McSweeney, regarded as the only acceptable route to take. The sort of sacking of various ministers on the so-called soft left of the Labour Party ended up giving those very victims more power than they've ever possessed before.
More from my conversation with UK political commentator Steve Richards coming up. I'm Michelle Hussein, and this is Bloomberg.
And I'm Monica Ricks in the Bloomberg newsroom. Here are some of the stories we're watching. Lindsey Graham, the South Carolina senator and foreign policy hawk who went from a Donald Trump skeptic to one of the president's strongest allies, has died at 71. Bloomberg's Ed Kalegi has details.
The cause of death was a brief and sudden illness. Graham's office said this in a post on X that offered no additional details. Emergency personnel responded to a call for cardiac arrest at Graham's Capitol Hill home. NBC reported this, citing police scanner audio. He was in Kyiv as recently as Friday before returning to Washington, where he was scheduled to appear on television Sunday morning. Seeking a fifth Senate term, Graham had been locked in a tight battle for re-election in the typically conservative southern state with Democrat Annie Andrews, a pediatrician. He won his primary election on June 9th. Ed Kalegi, Bloomberg Radio.
President Trump remembered Graham this morning on CNN.
What a terrible loss it is. He's a great politician. He was a natural. There are very few of them. He was a natural politician. Got along with everybody. When he didn't, he was very tough. He was a tough cookie, too, but he got along with everybody.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune talked about Graham's long and dedicated service. And Republican Governor Henry McMaster of South Carolina said he's devastated, calling Graham the fiercest of fighters. He'll appoint a temporary replacement to fill Graham's Senate seat through January. Meantime, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear has renewed his call for Republican Senator Mitch McConnell to release information about his health after he was hospitalized last month. McConnell hasn't been seen publicly since, and Beshear says he wants to end all the, quote, crazy speculation. Last week, McConnell's office claimed his condition was improving, but hasn't provided updates. For the third time in a week, U.S. forces struck Iran, prompting Tehran to retaliate and attack at least 5 Arab nations and declare the Strait of Hormuz closed until further notice. Bloomberg's Abir Abu Omar is covering the conflict now from Dubai.
So we're back to, I don't want to say square one, because we're not seeing a kinetic sort of warfare similar to what we've seen in March, but we're going back to a place that we didn't think we would be at after that MOU was signed just 3.5 weeks ago.
The U.S. says Hormuz is still open despite Iran's announcement. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg.
Harness the power of Bloomberg Intelligence every business day. Hi, I'm Scarlett Fu.
And I'm Paul Sweeney, inviting you to join us for the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast.
We bring you deep dives into the company's moving markets, from stocks like Apple, Nvidia, Microsoft, and Alphabet,
to private companies in the news like OpenAI and SpaceX.
Listen on your way home from work to catch up on the analysis that keeps you ahead of the competition.
Subscribe to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast today on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you listen.
On a recent edition of the Odd Lots podcast, Joe Weisenthal and Tracy Alloway speak with Barclays Global Head of Equities Tactical Strategies, Alexander Altman, on the levered ETFs shaking markets all over the world.
You specifically use the word terrifying to describe the amount of notional exposure coming from levered ETFs. Can you give us a little bit of context about how big this market actually is now?
I'll give you the numbers straight away. And markets are moving really quickly, so these numbers change a lot every day. The number itself is actually not enormously terrifying at all. I would just say the asymptotic growth of the AUM over the past few months has been somewhat sensational. Or it's just meteoric. So just to put some numbers behind that, if we look at, say, the Korean market, at the beginning of the year, Asia Pacific AUM was somewhere around about 12 or 13 billion. That's now around about 50.
Sorry, just wait. The AUM within these levered ETFs.
Of levered products.
Of levered products in Asia. They are now around about $50 to $55 billion. So talking about a threefold increase or plus over a relatively short period of time. And here in the US, if you take the beginning of April, which was, of course, the local lows for the market, we were talking around about 120 odd billion here in the US, and that's now increased. I think at its peak it was just north of 200 billion. And what's really interesting is that if you look at the US market, it's not like you've actually seen significant inflows and share creation in that space. Most of that AUM growth has been because of price performance.
Oh, interesting.
Whereas in Korea, you've actually seen huge share creation on top of meteoric rises in the share prices.
That's what's on a recent edition of the Odd Lots podcast. Listen to the full episode on Apple, Spotify, the Bloomberg Business app, or anywhere you get your podcasts.
Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Podcast Spotlight Hour on Bloomberg Radio.
I'm Michelle Hussein, and you're listening to some highlights of the Michelle Hussein Show podcast on Bloomberg Radio. This week, it's the political commentator and podcaster Steve Richards about the UK's upcoming change in leadership. In your book, The Prime Minister, you have a very useful checklist for if the country is looking to elect a Prime Minister, he or she must have the following qualifications. And the first one you put on the list is he or she must be a political teacher.
Yeah.
Which I thought teacher was a really interesting word to use here.
Yeah.
What do you mean by it? And is Andy Burnham a political teacher?
Yeah, a political teacher is absolutely essential because policies erupt around voters all the time. And what many aspiring leaders forget to do is explain why they are doing what they're doing. And more widely, you have to then explain how that policy fits into the rest of your government's policies, and then frame an overall sense of purpose and mission. And teaching can take kind of many different forms. President Trump is a teacher in his own way.
In his mastery of social media, in
his hunger to be the main commentator on his own leadership. And so he is an around-the-clock commentator. Now, he does it in a very eccentric way, but he is there explaining what he's doing and why he's doing it all the time. Now, Andy Burnham is a completely different political character, but he too is, I think, a teacher. I say I think because you never wholly know until they get into the position of ultimate power, president, prime minister. But I think he is one of those who is conscious all the time. He needs to be in a never-ending dialogue with voters. His social media videos are brilliant. Now, whether it's going to be quite challenging. So devolution, his big theme, is a quite dry topic. So he has to make it exciting. So the big test of his teaching capacity is to come. But the great election winners and those who remain in power for a long time are political teachers.
So it's interesting that you think he is that. And obviously, he's had a significant experience in Greater Manchester for nearly a decade. He's grown in that job, no doubt, but it's worth reminding everyone that he ran for the Labour leadership twice before and lost. And you, when you interviewed him a couple of years ago now, you did put this criticism to him that he has been seen as a bit of a shapeshifter, loyal to Tony Blair, loyal to Gordon Brown, not necessarily willing to go up against Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
He had an answer for you.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite interesting. He said, I was always to the left of New Labour.
This means essentially to the left of Tony Blair.
Yeah. So this is his own definition of who he is and always was. And I have some sympathy with him about this. As you know, there's a joke doing the rounds about someone going into the pub who's a Blairite, a Brownite, a Corbynista. Hello, Andy Burnham. But looking back to that period, there were lots of people who came into Parliament during the Tony Blair period who were ambitious and wanted to get into Tony Blair's government. And they hadn't always been where Tony Blair was. And they moved with the times and then they moved again. Lots of people do that. So I think probably his self-description of being to the left economically, but small c conservative on issues like crime and immigration is probably an accurate place to start in trying to understand him.
So let's dig into what he's done in Manchester, his record, and the idea that Manchesterism is the new political philosophy that he will bring to the government of the UK, a version of what he's achieved in Manchester. Can you explain it with reference to the buses? What did he do?
Yeah.
The terminology is significant.
Yeah. The terminology is really significant. And I made a mistake in that interview I did. I said, so you've become much more enthusiastic about public ownership. He uses the term public control. So what happened in Greater Manchester, and it had already begun before he got there, and he's been criticised for that as well. But I think that's unfair because, it's not his fault that good things were happening. It's how did he adapt to it when he got there? And so the buses were privatised, which meant only the routes that were profitable were run with any kind of regularity. There's trams in Manchester. They were completely disconnected from other transport services. So they connected the whole thing and they regulated. Fares were kept to a minimum. You could have a ticket where you could go from one form of transport, a bus, to another, the trams, as happens in London. And I remember the day it all was interconnected. He did one of his very clever pieces to camera on social media, and it felt exciting. Now, that's not the same as renationalization because the private sector is still involved.
They get a franchise.
But it's regulated and coordinated.
And they're forced to go to places which they might not have chosen to go to route-wise because it wasn't profitable.
Exactly.
But I think passenger numbers have risen.
Passenger numbers have risen. Revenue, therefore, goes up. And it generates growth because people can move around more efficiently. And the key thing, and this is where it works, I think, is these mayors are accountable for this. So if it had gone wrong, Burnham would have been a disaster area. The fact that it worked meant he was incredibly popular in Greater Manchester. And so it is about how you work with the private sector in different ways. Now, the big test is whether you can extend it across a whole country with different sized conurbations and all of that. And that's a huge question.
And not just in transport, in lots of other areas. There's this pamphlet that was released in this critical period a few weeks ago as Labour was mulling a new leader called The Productive State, which I think is known to be an influence. It comes from a group of MPs and Andy Burnham's endorsed this position. The Productive State, a framework for Manchesterism, which says that what's been done with buses could be done for water and energy. I mean, the idea is not just to make services better, but also to bring down the cost of living. Again, something that everyone wants to do everywhere in the world. I think what's interesting about this paper, and which I hadn't really thought about in this way till it spelt it out, is that it says that the high cost of essentials in the UK is not just about individual household budgets. It puts pressure on public spending because the welfare state has to cushion the blow of that. But the money it spends on housing benefit goes to landlords, or the money it might spend on energy bills goes to the energy companies. The state ameliorates without ever being permitted to cure directly. This is the fiscal escalator we are trapped on.
Yeah.
And there's clearly a problem there, but it feels like an immense one to solve.
It really does. I think this is what he means by this phrase, the outsourced state. Because how do you, to use another very popular phrase in British politics, take back control or a degree of control? And you're right to suggest or imply that with transport, to some extent, it's easy because the sums involved aren't huge. I mean, buses are relatively cheap to run. The challenge with something like water is massive because the truth is there has been underinvestment in water since the privatization and before they were privatized.
Where do you think those sums that will be necessary will come from? Because the choice could largely be taxation or it could be borrowing.
Yeah.
He has said he will stick to the current government's rules, which limit borrowing for day-to-day spending. So, I mean, what are you expecting? More taxation or more borrowing or a mix?
There's going to have to be more taxation. I mean, if you look at what he has been saying, and I think at this point we do have to follow what he has been saying and assume he means it. So one of the things he has said is that he's going to initiate the biggest council house building program for decades. We know he wants to speed up plans for a national social care system. When he was health secretary, he had devised one and was going to fund it through various means, which got labelled as the death tax because it was about inheritance tax.
A tax on people's estates.
Exactly, yeah. So then we look at the demands for defence spending, which seem to go up and up on a kind of near daily basis. And we haven't even got to water. So these are huge things. We also know that he's publicly said he will stick to the fiscal rules, although he's indicated in the past that they need to be looked at again. But I don't think he has the space to look at them again at the beginning. There is a fear in Britain of every incoming prime minister of having a Liz Truss experience. Liz Truss, prime minister for a month, the markets went bonkers and she was out. And so therefore, I think he will have to and will, I think, put up taxes. And how he does that will be very interesting, who he targets, because these midterm prime ministers are constrained. They haven't won an election. So he's working on a parliament elected on Labour's manifesto at the last general election, which ruled out quite a lot of tax rises.
Well, or he's in the position where he doesn't have to have an election for another 3 years, and he could do at that time and you know, try and show a record that enables people to elect him at that point.
Yeah, that is probably what he will do. It's quite hard, if you're a prime minister, to give up a House of Commons where you have a majority of way over 100. Which is huge in British politics. Most prime ministers would die for this kind of majority. However, this will be a running theme. It always is with incoming prime ministers. And the one advantage it would give Andy Burnham if he were to hold and win a general election is he would then be freer to pursue his own agenda on all these issues, giving away power from the centre to the local tax. He would have more flexibility. Mind you, going into an election, saying you're going to change that is a risk as well. As ever with leadership, he faces thousands of dilemmas.
More from my conversation with UK political commentator Steve Richards coming up. I'm Michelle Hussein, and this is Bloomberg.
The more you listen to your kids, the closer you'll be. Find resources to help you support your kids and their emotional well-being at sounditouttogether.org. That's sounditouttogether.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and Pivotal.
This is your 24-hour source for world markets and breaking business news. Bloomberg Radio. Coming up, the latest market-moving headlines from Bloomberg. First, an update from our partners at ABC News.
ABC News, I'm Brian Clark. Lawmakers continue their tributes to Lindsey Graham after the senator died at 71. Vice President J.D. Vance called him a one-of-a-kind figure in our politics. ABC's Stephen Portnoy has more on the South Carolina Republican who had served in the Senate since 2003.
He was a national security hawk, a fierce critic of Iran and supporter of Israel and Ukraine. In fact, Lindsey Graham had just completed his 10th trip to Ukraine on Friday. The Israeli prime minister says Israel has lost one of its greatest friends. Graham's sudden death at 71 after a report of chest pains is shocking news here. He was running for re-election this November. He was due to appear on Meet the Press this morning.
South Carolina's governor will name a replacement to fill the rest of Graham's term. Nearly 600 people under evacuation orders as a result of the Summit fire burning in eastern Los Angeles County. It's nearly 3,000 acres. It's 8% contained. This is ABC News.
And I'm Monica Ricks in the Bloomberg newsroom. Here are some of the stories we're watching. Crude oil futures closed lower ahead of the weekend, but could soar to start the trading week as the U.S. ramps up attacks on Iran in the Middle East. Iran's declared the Strait of Hormuz closed until further notice and launched assaults on at least 5 American allies across the region. Those retaliatory attacks are now casting significant doubts on imminent peace talks to end the war. The hiring boom expected from the FIFA World Cup in the U.S. may not materialize after all, with payrolls and employment in the leisure and hospitality sector down by some 21,000 over the past 2 months. Expensive hotels and ticket prices have raised concerns about the eventual boost, with geopolitical tensions, higher airfares, and other barriers potentially limiting international travel. Fed Chair Kevin Warsh is set to testify on Capitol Hill over 2 days this week, beginning with an appearance before the House Financial Services Committee on Tuesday. Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet has details.
We know what Warsh will say in the central bank's semi-annual monetary policy report to Congress. It was released Friday in Washington. What we don't know is how he will respond to questions on a range of topics from lawmakers. The report is the first under the new Fed chair, and it sends an upbeat message about the economy. It describes growth as solid and productivity as strong while finding little sign of risk in the banking system. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
Earnings season also kicks off this week with reports expected from J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Goldman Sachs on Tuesday. Morgan Stanley reports on Wednesday. And we should get some economic data, including the June Consumer Price Index, retail sales data, and production, inflation, and jobs numbers. Jobless claims are expected to remain pretty flat this month. A group led by tech billionaire Vinod Khosla has agreed to buy the Seattle Seahawks in a deal that's expected to set an NFL record. Terms haven't been disclosed, but Sportico values the deal at $9.6 billion. Owners are said to be meeting in late August to approve it. And as we've been reporting, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham has died, according to his office, from a brief and sudden illness. Graham served in the Senate for more than 2 decades and had been in Ukraine as recently as Friday before returning to Washington. He was 71 years old. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg.
From dreamer to doer, it's about finding the right path and the right people to walk alongside you. At Indiana Wesleyan University, we help dreamers become doers through flexible learning pathways, including online, hybrid, and on-campus opportunities, accessible tuition, incredible community, and intentional faculty who make world-changing connections. The road ahead? It's closer than you think. With Indiana Wesleyan. Start today at discovertheway.com.
Up to the minute market headlines.
The stock story of the day is NVIDIA.
The trend line is good for jobless claims.
Along with in-depth research on more than 2,000 global companies.
Some of these big tech names, are these entry points?
What does renewables investment look like in the U.S.?
The Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast with Scarlett Fu and Paul Sweeney.
How do you broaden out the AI play?
Listen live weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app or on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Barry Ritholtz, inviting you to join me for At the Money, a weekly dive into money, earning it, spending it, and investing it. From portfolio construction to taxes and cutting down on fees, you'll learn the best ways to put your money to work. Listen to At the Money every week on my Masters in Business podcast feed. It's available on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
From the state courts.
Tell us a little about the facts of the case.
To the Supreme Court.
Can Congress force a judicial code on the justices?
June Grasso delivers your legal intelligence.
Multiple lawsuits were filed against the emergency rule.
The Bloomberg Law Podcast.
Is the toughest hurdle for prosecutors proving Trump's intent?
Listen live weeknights at 6 Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app or anywhere you get your podcasts. Bloomberg Podcasts. Context changes everything.
Hi, I'm Carol Masser with a helpful tip to keep you plugged in throughout the market day. Subscribe to the Stock Movers Report from Bloomberg. These are short audio episodes, 5 minutes or less, delivered right to your podcast feed. Stock Movers fills you in on the day's winners and losers on Wall Street and tells you about the news and data that's driving those gains and losses. Why spend all day watching tickers scroll across your screen? Subscribe to Stock Movers today on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. It's one of the promises of artificial intelligence. Technology will take over the grunt work and leave humans free to do the more creative, high-order stuff. But even in Silicon Valley, the AI dream hasn't quite caught up with the reality.
It's no longer the human controlling the AI, but the AI controlling the human.
Natasha Mascarenas covers venture capital and startups for Bloomberg News. She says the rapid AI build-out is leading to more burnout for the engineers who code the agents and the startup founders looking to monetize them.
It's not just working all hours. It's if we don't hit a multi-billion-dollar revenue stream, not valuation, revenue, by next year, our company is toast.
Now, hustle culture in big tech is nothing new. Elon Musk used to sleep on Tesla's factory floor, but Mascarena says the anxiety underneath the current AI hustle has a certain irony.
One developer I spoke to is the mother of 2 children who mentioned that she's often told by Claude Code to go to sleep and, head to vacation.
Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest Balance of Power podcast, we talk with Trita Parsi from the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, as President Trump says the ceasefire with Iran is over.
It's not that there is an impossibility to get back to talks. There already seems to be some significant efforts. It's that this memorandum period was supposed to be used to actually help build some confidence between the two sides so they could strike a final deal. But so far, it seems that this effort has been a confidence depleting effort rather than a confidence building period. And that's very problematic because ultimately that makes it more difficult to get a lasting deal at the end of this.
President called the regime scum this week, among other interesting names. Clearly, there's no trust on our side of things, and that's probably deserved. Do you believe or expect that Iran will trust Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff enough to make a deal?
No, I don't think either side is going to trust the other. And as you mentioned, the U.S. has now attacked Iran twice in the midst of negotiations, including killing their supreme leader. So trust is beyond what we can expect, but one can trust the incentive and interest of the other side to be a guide of how they will act. And if there's a deal that actually is good for both sides and it's better than the alternative, then you can trust that they will follow their own self-interest in a rational way and stick to it. That's the sweet spot that the two countries have to find.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Balance of Power podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Hey, wouldn't it be great if life came with a remote control? You could hit pause when you needed to, or hit rewind. Like that time you knocked down that wasp's nest. Uh-oh. Or that time you forgot to roll up your windows in the car wash.
Fantastic.
Yeah, a remote control would have come in handy then. Well, life doesn't always give you time to change the outcome. But prediabetes does. With early diagnosis and a few healthy changes like managing your weight, getting active, stopping smoking, and eating healthier, you can stop prediabetes before it leads to type 2 diabetes. It's easy to learn your risk. Take the 1-minute test today at doihaveprediabetes.org. Life doesn't come with a remote control. Yikes! So you're on your own with the wasps. You have the power to take control of prediabetes. Visit doihaveprediabetes.org today. That's doihaveprediabetes.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and its Prediabetes Awareness Partners.
Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Podcast Spotlight Hour on Bloomberg Radio.
I'm Michelle Hussein, and you're listening to some highlights of the Michelle Hussein Show podcast on Bloomberg Radio. This week, it's the political commentator and podcaster Steve Richards about the UK's upcoming change in leadership. It's interesting that you don't think he'll go for more borrowing, because you could make the argument for borrowing and say it's not for day-to-day spending, it's for investing in the future.
Yeah.
And in this productive state pamphlet, that's essentially the argument they put, that it's not going to be the same kind of borrowing in the past. And therefore, it is something that the bond markets could buy into.
It's quite interesting because Rachel Reeves, the current Chancellor, who will lose her job when Andy Burnham comes in, he'll appoint a new Chancellor, did change her very rigid fiscal rules on capital spending, investment in infrastructure. So they have a bit of flexibility there already. And you are right that some of those who are very influential on him, people who were in the cabinet under Keir Starmer, who sometimes got sacked from his cabinet, have been arguing that the markets will be okay if you can show you are borrowing to invest in a way that actually will raise revenue and be part of this so-called productive state. So they might try and go a bit further, but they already have a bit more room than many realize, because Rachel Reeves did revise this. She's cross, she hasn't got credit for it, but there it is. They've got more room to borrow if they want to. But the lesson of the past is that these Labour chancellors who have sought to reassure, it all tends to implode in quite dramatic ways. Rachel Reeves being an example. So the totemic policy for Rachel Reeves was cutting the winter fuel allowance for pensioners in Britain. And actually, she did it to appear strong, an iron chancellor, and it's gone terribly wrong for her. So there are risks of caution as well.
Nigel Farage has definitely been an actor in this Labour drama, hasn't he? In that it's the prospect of him on course to be the next Prime Minister that has driven many Labour MPs to be as against Starmer as they turned out. What do you think Andy Burnham's strategy is for beating Farage? Is it to portray him as being beyond the pale? Is it more of a wooing back the reform voter, in which he possibly risks alienating those who've gone to the Greens?
In the by-election that he won, Reform was the main opponent. And his strategy there was hardly to reference them, certainly not to make attacks on Nigel Farage at all. And at the moment, there is plenty of ammunition to attack Nigel Farage, but he didn't do it. He just focused on trying to attract a coalition of support around him. And I think he will begin with that as Prime Minister, inevitably, certainly if Reform is the main opposition by the time of a general election. That can't work. He will have to
go on the attack.
But go on the attack
in what way? What would you advise? Is it to try and portray Farage as racist, or because there's also another party now, Restore, which is to the right of Reform.
Yeah.
What would you suggest is the tact to take?
I think what he will try and do is become the figure where all those who want to stop Farage becoming Prime Minister feel okay about coalescing around. One of the problems Keir Starmer had was that he had alienated quite a few on the left who went to the Greens, and quite a few who have gone to Reform. And Burnham will hope he's an attractive enough public figure that they all feel okay about him. Now, whether this will work will partly depend on how successful he is, of course. And if he's not, who knows what will then follow. But you are right to say, I think, one of the many driving forces behind this astonishing rise from not being in the House of Commons to being Prime Minister is this: have we found a figure who can stop Nigel Farage, the other good communicator in British politics? Not brilliant, but good. And before Burnham came, the best amongst the party leaders. And it was very interesting in the by-election. Nigel Farage was there quite a lot. And I've always thought what a great communicator he is. He has the knack of appearing to have a conversation, although I think he was a bit rude to you, famously, I think, when you interviewed him. But in that by-election, a bit like actually when he was with you, I thought he looked ill at ease somehow in his slightly old-fashioned double-breasted suit. He couldn't hide the fact that he was uneasy about their choice of candidate. And I thought, is he such a brilliant communicator?
Nigel Farage has got this continuing relationship with Donald Trump. And of course, one area in which Andy Burnham is completely untested is foreign policy. How do you think he'll fare? Do you think how will he deal with Donald Trump? Let's just get to that. Because Trump's already been quite dismissive of Burnham.
Very dismissive.
He's a mayor of a town.
Yeah, very dismissive about who he sees as a rather pathetic figure. It's not at all unusual for a British Prime Minister new to the job to have no feel for foreign affairs whatsoever. That applied to Margaret Thatcher, who formed a very close relationship with Reagan. It applied to Tony Blair. We've talked about how foreign affairs sucked him up. America, Clinton, Bush, Iraq, Europe. None of them came in with any feel whatsoever for foreign affairs. And then foreign affairs absolutely sucked up their energy and attention. And this will happen to Andy Burnham. So he will have to adapt quickly. I think we will have to wait and see.
What would you advise him, though? Would you say with Trump?
With Trump.
Be bold, as your advice is in other areas?
Well, if you look back at how Starmer really went out of his way to woo Trump, he got another state visit, and he hasn't got much out, to put it at best. But I think what Burnham will try and do is I think there will be a renewed focus on Britain's relationship with Europe, which, to give Starmer credit for, there was this, what they call a reset. Relations are much better now with Britain and other European leaders. I think Burnham will want to intensify that. We know that he is passionately pro-European, and he has said he wants Britain to go back into the European Union in his lifetime. I mean, he's quite young, so that's not a big specific commitment. But I think there will be quite a lot of focus on that. But yeah, he will try. He will be very nice to Trump. He can be charming. He's learned how to be a rather charming public figure. And when they have one of their famous meetings on that White House sofa, I think he will manage that absolutely fine.
Steve, finally, he clearly has the support of scores of MPs on his own side. We could see that the moment he walked into Westminster and they were all gathered there to receive him. But we also know that this is a pretty fickle group of MPs, isn't it? Like, a lot of them were elected 2 years ago. They turned on the man who led them to that victory pretty swiftly. Do you think that could be something he can't take for granted, having his own MPs on side? You try to do something big, there's loads of people who come to you and say why you can't do it.
Yeah. For viewers and listeners who don't know, he arrived in Parliament the Monday after he won this by-election, and hundreds of Labour MPs gathered to be photographed with him. And I saw some of those Labour MPs and I thought, I'm tempted to tell Andy Burnham what they were saying about him just months ago. They weren't all avid fans then. And you are right, this is a very hard parliamentary Labour Party to manage. There are a lot of Labour MPs with seats with very tiny majorities. And if it goes wrong, they will turn. The way in British politics and in other countries too, in America, so the authority of a president, the authority of a prime minister is partly dependent on the opinion polls and whether they are doing well. Keir Starmer lost authority ultimately because Labour were being slaughtered in elections and in the opinion polls. So part of Burnham's authority is the Labour MPs hope he's going to be popular. And if that isn't the case, I'm sure he'll get a honeymoon. A lot of them will turn. And there are specific policy areas where he will have to engage with them. Welfare reform being one example. But I think he'll be quite good at engaging with them. But yeah, you are right to point out that MPs increasingly are fickle in all parties. Reform people will turn on Farage, Conservatives on their leaders if they are unpopular. So the stakes for Burnham to stay, he's at the moment Labour's most popular politician. He needs to keep that position because that's from where a lot of his authority is derived.
And he needs to make Nigel Farage less popular. He needs those opinion polls to turn, the ones which put Farage on course to be the next Prime Minister.
That is the context. Reform have been ahead in opinion polls in Britain for a long time now. And part of his task is to turn that round. And if he pulls it off, he will continue to have authority. But a lot of MPs won't get jobs in the Burnham administration, so won't be thrilled and things. It's very hard to manage a parliamentary party in a modern era where loyalty to leadership is not a given.
Are you looking forward to this period? Do you feel as a commentator you've got more of a spring in your step?
Well, politics is endlessly fascinating because it's human beings trying to do things that you would otherwise determine by war. But yeah, I think we're in an extraordinary period. And because it's moving so fast, you can lose how astonishing it is. You know, Labour have never dumped a leader. Never. And here it is doing so in dramatic circumstances. So, yeah, it's going to be absolutely compelling.
Interesting times. Steve Richards, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to some of the highlights from my podcast. To hear the full conversation, please subscribe to The Michelle Hussein Show, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Michelle Hussein, and this is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. Powered by more than 3,000 journalists and analysts in over 100 bureaus around the world. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From ABC News, I'm Brian Clark. News of Senator Lindsey Graham's sudden death at 71 has shocked Washington, D.C. President Trump told CNN's State of the Union,
I got to know him by little drips and drabs, and then we became friendly, and there was no better advocate. He was a fantastic advocate in the Senate, and he could do things that other people, he was able to, if I had a really big problem with a certain Democrat, he could work it out.
Graham's office says he died after a brief and sudden illness. 911 was called to his Washington, D.C. home Saturday night after a report of a man experiencing chest pains. As for what happens next, ABC's Jay O'Brien says
South Carolina's governor will now appoint an interim senator to fill Graham's seat until his term ends in January. Graham was running for re-election, so Republicans in South Carolina now have to hold a special primary to fill his spot on the ballot.
the U.S. and Iran have traded fire over the last several days, leading to uncertainty about the status of the Strait of Hormuz. And UN Ambassador Mike Waltz tells ABC,
I think Iran is still very much of the mindset that it can use the global economy as some type of leverage.
U.S. Central Command says the strait is open. Parts of the Rocky Mountain region could experience record high temperatures today, and that heat has been a challenge for firefighters as they work to battle a large wildfire outside of Los Angeles. ABC's Melissa Adon has details.
Firefighters responding aggressively. We've seen quite the aerial assault, even a military C-130 aircraft assisting, as well as a dozen helicopters and fixed-wing aircrafts dropping water on those flames that are burning into the Angeles National Forest. Well, it's also impacting surrounding communities as nearly 600 people are under evacuation orders or warnings, and officials say one home was damaged.
You're listening to ABC News.
Now, Bloomberg Radio weather on SiriusXM 121.
We'll likely see some travel problems later this afternoon into and out of the Little Rock area. Temperatures in Little Rock are going to be near 91. Showers, thunderstorms will also cause problems this afternoon and into the evening around the New Orleans area. Temperatures in New Orleans should be near 92. If you're headed to or from Charlotte, there may be some showers and thunderstorms mid to late afternoon that start to produce delays. Temperatures in Charlotte are going to be near 91. Those of you headed to or from Raleigh, watch for showers and thunderstorms producing some afternoon delays. Temperatures in Raleigh near 93. Nashville may be another trouble spot this afternoon with scattered showers and thunderstorms. The temperatures in Nashville near 86. Look for problems to start to develop sometime this afternoon in the Atlanta area due to showers and thunderstorms, 90 in Atlanta. I'm Rob Carolyn, and that's your Bloomberg Travelers Forecast. Now back to the latest headlines from ABC News.
Police in Austin, Texas fatally shot a man Saturday morning who they say was pointing a gun in the city's downtown at people. Assistant Police Chief Lee Rogers said,
It was reported that this male individual was pointing this firearm at multiple people throughout the area. As we all know, this is a very busy area. It's a very vibrant part of our community with a lot of people out and about at all hours of the day.
He promised more information would be released in the coming days, including video. 15 tourists from India were killed after a speedboat they were riding in capsized in Vietnam. Witnesses said that there was no emergency medical care available at the shore when the survivors were brought back. In the U.S., lawmakers celebrated a new housing bill becoming law without President Trump's signature. The president couldn't stop the bill.
If he had vetoed it, we would have been able to override that veto.
Congresswoman Maxine Waters, California Democrat, says the law aims to reduce homelessness.
We're not only going going to create opportunities for affordable housing. We got to make sure that public housing has the resources and begin to fix up these houses.
Trump said he didn't sign the bill because Congress hasn't passed an unrelated elections bill that doesn't have enough votes in the Senate to pass.
That's ABC's Chuck Sievertson. The Final Four is set at the World Cup after extra time wins for England and Argentina. They'll play a semifinal in Atlanta Wednesday, Spain and France in Dallas on Tuesday. I'm Brian Clark, ABC News.
And I'm Monica Ricks in the Bloomberg newsroom. Here are some of the stories we're watching. The Joint Maritime Information Center says the Strait of Hormuz's southern route remains open to shipping this morning, despite Iran declaring the waterway closed in the region after trading a wave of new attacks with the U.S. That could cause oil prices to spike when trading starts, but for now, crude oil futures sit at $76 a barrel. 5 of the largest U.S. banks are set to release earnings on Tuesday, with Bank of America, J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, and Citi all reporting within the same hour. Herman Chan is a senior analyst with Bloomberg Intelligence.
Banks have really shrugged off some of these geoeconomic issues and the K-shaped economy that we continue to hear about. There's really strong earnings power, both on the trading side, the investment banking side, and on the lending side. Your typical bread and butter commercial lending is really strong. So about 20% year-over-year growth. We're looking for really good results overall.
That's Herman Chan on Bloomberg this weekend. Later in the week, Netflix kicks off tech earnings as the streaming platform struggles with slowing growth and an increasingly fragmented industry. Meta unveiled a new AI model called Muse Spark this week, but it's already been removed from apps like Instagram following backlash and copyright concerns. The feature used public users' photos and likeness to create AI images without their consent. The Seattle Seahawks have a new owner. Here's Bloomberg's Ed Kalegi.
Tech billionaire Vinod Khosla has reached an agreement to buy the Seattle Seahawks for $9.6 billion. This according to people familiar with the details. It's one of the largest valuations ever for a sports team in a control transaction, nearing the $10 billion price tag in Mark Walters' purchase of the NBA's Los Angeles Lakers. The India-born Khosla, who is a prominent venture capitalist, is worth about $13.7 billion according to Forbes. He is buying the defending Super Bowl champions from the estate of late owner Paul Allen. Ed Kalegi, Bloomberg Radio.
Owners plan to meet next month to approve it. And as we've been reporting today, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham has died at 71. According to NBC, emergency workers responded to a call for cardiac arrest at his home in Washington last night. Graham had served in the Senate for more than 2 decades and had been seeking a 5th term. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg.
The breaking news out of Washington is constant.
President Trump spoke at the National Mall.
The Supreme Court upheld birthright citizenship.
And Bloomberg has the experts to bring you every angle.
The phone calls the president received from President Zelensky and President Putin.
Republicans face a tough midterm environment.
Breaking political headlines from the team that knows D.C.
Former Vice President Mike Pence, great to have you here.
Listen on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. And always on Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything.
Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Podcast Spotlight Hour on Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome to the Odd Lots podcast on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Joe Weisenthal.
And I'm Tracy Alloway.
Today you are listening to our conversation with Scott Patton, the Aldi U.S. Chief Commercial Officer. We are talking about how a grocery store can reduce prices by reducing variety. Tracy, can I tell you something? I don't know if I've brought it up on the podcast before, but I love grocery stores. I love visiting different kinds of grocery stores. I love produce aisles. Mm-hmm. I like seeing new ones. If I'm in a rush or whatever, it's not so pleasant, but I really like grocery stores.
How often do you do the weekly grocery shopping, Joe?
Well, so we usually buy online, but I go to Key Foods, which is in my neighborhood probably once or twice a week for things. And I actually, even those quick runs, I actually enjoy. Obviously, unboxing is not fun, and there are aspects of it that are fun, but as an interesting experience, and I like food.
I will say, I'm starting to become cynical about the American grocery experience, which is terrible because I didn't go to American grocery stores for a really long time. So
What years are you talking about? Like when you were in Japan?
So I grew up in Japan. I remember going to grocery stores when I came back to Chicago in middle school and just being absolutely wowed by the variation that was there. And,
Right.
like literally a kid in a candy store running down the cereal aisle going,
I know.
oh my God, I've never seen any of these things before. Doing the whole, what's the famous?
The Yeltsin thing. So you could get how at least they spark joy.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course. But now I think I take them as an accepted.
Yeah.
Because now I'm
you get yourself for sure.
I shop a lot at Walmart.
Yeah.
In Connecticut, which is sometimes a soul sucking experience. I shop a lot at the grocery store that we're about to discuss. I shop a lot at the nearest grocery store in Manhattan.
Which one's that?
That one's a Morton Williams.
Okay. Yeah.
And that one, I'm trying to be diplomatic. It's just depressing. The price. I ran in there once and I grabbed like a cup of soup, like freshly made soup, because I was having dinner, a girl dinner, basically. $12 freaking.
I know. The Manhattan specific grocery experience, I would say, uneven to put it best. There are some decent ones, but there's a lot of places that are like high-end and expensive and low-end and expensive. You know what I'm saying? Like, you go to these places and they're sort of shabby and they're dirty and stuff like that. You're like, well, at least I'm getting a deal. And then it's like, actually, no, it's just a worse experience and also it's expensive.
This reminds me also when my husband first came over from the States to join me here in New York, the first place I took him to was the Whole Foods on Columbus Circle.
Oh, really?
Because I just wanted to show him, look at this grocery store. It's crazy.
You know, there's a new Wegmans at Astor Place, which is where I get off. And I really expected that to become part of my routine because that's where I get on the subway. I like it. It's cool and they have a lot of stuff, but it hasn't become part of my routine. So there's opportunity still, I would say, for the better Manhattan and just the better grocery store experience still.
It is very true that Manhattan has a shortage of, let's say, lower priced grocery stores, right? We've got the Whole Foods. We have Trader Joe's. Maybe that's the closest, but we have a lot of Whole Foods, a lot of Wegmans. I'm not even going to mention what's the one with the G.
Oh, yeah, Gristedes.
There we go. Gristedes, Morton Williams, places like that. But we don't really have, we definitely don't have a Walmart.
Well, in Texas, we have H-E-B, which everybody loves. That's like one of the most beloved brands, I think, in the region. They're like super, and they're huge, and they're clean, and they have good prices, and incredible variety, and a sushi bar and a barbecue pit in the store. Anyway, there's a new grocery store opening up. We're recording this June 18th. Tomorrow, as of the time we're recording this, but tomorrow, like right in Times Square, right adjacent to Times Square, there's a brand new Aldi, which is, I guess, where you shop sometimes when you're in Connecticut.
Yeah, so this is very unusual in my mind because you wouldn't expect a giant grocery store to open just off Times Square.
Yeah.
I think the new location is something like 25,000 square feet, which is just absolutely huge.
Especially for that area.
I can't even imagine actually finding the space for something like that. And then secondly, you wouldn't necessarily expect, I don't want to say a discount grocery store, but like a lower priced grocery store that competes squarely with the Walmarts, the Costcos of the world.
Totally. And they are, I think, substantially cheaper. I searched this. They claim that they're cheap, but also the third party.
We should just say, we already went on a tour of the new location.
Yeah, we're a little biased because also they gave us a tour. So this is the disclosure. They gave us a tour and they had all these like little snacks out for us and stuff like that. So I'm already predisposed.
But on the plus side, we have personally witnessed ground Wagyu beef for $5.99. It does exist.
But I haven't tried it yet. Anyway, let's get to the conversation. Let's talk about opening a grocery store. Let's talk about how do you actually wring prices out of the system, because that is the story and that is what's exciting for us. We're going to be speaking with Aldi U.S. Chief Commercial Officer Scott Patton. Scott, welcome to the podcast. We saw you yesterday inside the new Aldi, and now you're here on the podcast. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and so glad you could make it out to the store yesterday. It was a really awesome experience to walk through, really, Times Square. Aldi right off the Times Square. Amazing.
Let's just talk about what does the Chief Commercial Officer do? Tell us about what's your actual job and your career at Aldi.
So I actually started with Aldi over 30 years ago. I've been through all the various operations from running stores to running a warehouse, and I joined the buying department about 11 years ago. So I'm responsible for all of the products in the stores, and that's what I do. We work with the teams who develop the products and get them onto the shelf.
So tell us about the new location, because as we were discussing, Times Square, not necessarily an intuitive place to start a giant grocery store.
Yeah, so Midtown Manhattan, that's our second location in Manhattan. You're right, it's not intuitive.
Where's the first one?
First one is up in Harlem.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have 14 in the 14 in the New York area. One in Harlem, Midtown now, and another opening in Harlem next year, and 2 blocks off of Times Square. You're right. It's a very unique location for us, but a lot of traffic. We have a lot of tourists. We have a lot of commuters. There's going to be a lot of e-commerce, and it's just a great location.
It's a cool space. What was there before, do you know?
It's a brand new building. It's a brand new building with residential on top, and we've taken the ground floor.
Do you think that's an appeal? Like, I think I would like to live above a grocery store. It seems like a nice, amenity.
It's great. I mean, there's going to be residential above us and unbelievable apartments. And to have that convenience for the people who live there, it's going to be great.
Yeah. A lot of cities in Asia, as you know now, have mixed use buildings.
Yeah, I love that.
So much
I think
more,
it's
like some of them even have daycares on the bottom, and then the grocery store, dry cleaner. Like, you take care of your entire life within one compound.
I'd be totally down.
Yeah. So the Times Square location, I get that there's a lot of foot traffic, but how much of it is just creating a showcase for the Aldi brand in an area where there's going to be a lot of visitors, a lot of tourists, versus how much of it is the expectation that this is going to be a really busy location that's actually making profit?
There's no doubt that having that visibility is going to be great for the brand. But to be fair, we intend to be very profitable at the store. We're going to have a ton of customers. That would be a very expensive billboard if we weren't going to sell a lot of groceries.
We've done a few produce episodes. Mm-hmm. We recently did an episode on tomatoes with one of the senior VPs at Beldor. That was an amazing conversation. We did a conversation a few years ago about the Hunts Point Delivery Distribution Center in New York and maybe why it's not the optimal sort of node for delivery. What is the supply chain between, for example, when we entered the store, we were in the produce aisle, and we tried some blueberries that are very nice. Why don't you walk us through what is the supply chain from where that grape comes from to where the distribution center is to the store and that journey?
And that's a prime example of how we buy a bit differently. So we have over 2,600 locations. So what does that mean is we can't just buy from the local market. We start with the grower. I have the opportunity in my role to visit the growers. So we've been to the grape growers in California, in Mexico, in Chile. And it really starts probably 3 to 4 years in advance in partnering with these growers. We go to the fields, we try their varieties, they're all sampled out, and we decide as a company which varieties do we want them to grow for us. From there, they start growing, we have the contracts, and they grow specific plots dedicated to our business. So of course we have the harvest, it goes straight from the grower into our distribution facilities, and then to our stores often the next day. So it's a complicated supply chain, but the key to success is going all the way back to the origin. So whether you're growing grapes or berries or apples, those relationships with the farmers and the growers, that's actually what makes it special.
But in terms of the actual distribution into New York, because we've had conversations with not just grocers, but people who are trying to build things in New York, and they talk about how hard it actually is to get bulky things into the city. Yeah. How are you trucking in, I assume, truckloads of groceries every day, and where are they coming from?
So we come from South Windsor up in Connecticut. We have a truck that comes over. We come at night because of the congestion. And you're right, it's very difficult to get a truck, especially into Midtown. We have to have a bit of a shorter truck. We actually have to have 2 drivers.
Did you say a bit of a shorter truck?
It's a bit of a shorter truck because they can't hit the turning radiuses. Oh, yeah, for instance, at this store, when the truck comes in to deliver, it's a shorter truck. There's 2 drivers. One to kind of guide and watch the parking and make sure we can cut the radius back in. Another one to unload the groceries. So it's a 2-team just to deliver groceries. And this store is going to get 3 to 4 truckloads a day. So it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of manpower, and it's a logistical, really kind of a symphony to get it done.
Wait, let's just talk more about that. Because when I think, okay, why do we pay a lot for groceries in New York City? Intuitively, that makes a lot of, just even the trucking component and the fact that you go out to the suburbs and they don't have to have a guy saying, and the beep, is there a car there? Is a kid on a scooter or something like that there? Talk to us a little bit more figuring that component out and the 2 drivers and how that sort of, the math of what that contributes or saves in terms of groceries.
Yeah, and with everything we do, and we're really focused on efficiency. You mentioned sushi bars and barbecue places before. Yeah. So we don't have those.
Yeah, I know.
But when we're going to put a truck, we're going to 2 guys onto a truck, 2 drivers onto a truck 3 to 4 times a day. That goes into the calculus. Of course, we look at the rent we're going to pay. It's more expensive in Manhattan, no doubt about it. But then we look at the sales. It's just a math equation. We make sure that, yes, there's going to be extra cost on delivery. There's going to be extra cost on properties. That's just a fact, but it goes into the equation.
So, okay, you've got trucks delivering the groceries overnight. You have a huge space. I should just emphasize, we saw it.
Yeah.
We ran through the aisles because we never got the chance to run through groceries. I'm going to speed it up 2 times,
to
Joe.
make it look like
It'll look
running
really
fast.
good. Yeah, that's right. You're expecting a lot of people in that location. How are you going to be restocking the shelves? Because it's a big space, but there are a lot of people in New York. I imagine things will literally be flying off the shelves to some degree. What does that restocking process look like in a crowded city?
Great question. And we have awesome employees at the store, first and foremost. Some unique things about how we restock our stores is all of our product comes in a display case. So again, we go back to those supply partners and we say, okay, how can we restock the organic greens? How can we restock the spinach? They put it into a display ready case. We
this
take
is
that
like
case.
A box
it's like
where
a tray.
you can see the items. Yeah,
it's a tray. So our staff can restock case after case after case and not have to stack it unit by unit by unit. So we're going to restock that produce 3 to 4 times a day, but we can do it really, really fast.
Stay tuned for more of our interview with Aldi U.S. Chief Commercial Officer Scott Patton. We are talking about opening up a low-price grocery store in the middle of Manhattan. To hear the full conversation, subscribe to Odd Lots wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Tracy Alloway.
And I'm Joe Weisenthal, and this is Odd Lots on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm Monica Ricks in the Bloomberg newsroom. Here are some of the stories we're watching. President Trump is reflecting on Senator Lindsey Graham, who died last night at 71 from what his office says was a brief and sudden illness. The president tells CNN Graham was one of his closest allies in Congress.
There was no better advocate. He was a fantastic advocate in the Senate, and he could do things that other people, he was able to. If I had a really big problem with a certain Democrat, he could work it out. You know, that's something most Republicans can't do.
Bloomberg congressional reporter Eric Wasson also weighed in on the senior senator's legacy.
Very much an interventionist, very much a war hawk. You know, he was very much in favor of the bombing of Iran, of trying to replace the regime there. Just a very assertive foreign policy voice that's going to leave that faction of the party without a very, very clear champion right now in the debates to come.
Graham had just been in Ukraine meeting with President Zelensky on Friday and said he'd look forward to advancing Russian sanctions legislation. Zelensky, by the way, removed the country's prime minister this morning as part of a broader cabinet shakeup. He said on social media that he's making these changes to update Ukraine's political strategy as the country continues its attacks on vessels and energy infrastructure this weekend in Russia. In the Middle East, the U.S. and Iran continued trading strikes, leaving potential peace talks in limbo. Bloomberg's Abir Abu Omar is covering the conflict from Dubai.
We're seeing this escalation in the rhetoric quite a bit this morning. It's still unclear if we're going to see a return to diplomacy, a return to those technical talks that were taking place up until a couple of weeks ago. But it seems that the situation is slightly a little bit more complicated, especially with pretexts saying that Iran will pay for the damage that it had ensued on the Strait of Hormuz.
Iran declared the waterway closed till further notice, but the U.S. says it's still open. The death toll from 2 powerful earthquakes in Venezuela has now surpassed 4,300 as recovery efforts continue for thousands more still missing in the disaster. President Delcy Rodriguez has renewed her call to the UN for financial help. And flooding in Missouri has turned deadly after the body of a woman was found when her home was swept off its foundation. So far, rescuers there have pulled hundreds of people from high waters, including more than 200 at a local summer camp. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest edition of the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, formerly with Fidelity and now Noble Capital, George Noble.
This is 120 times revenues. And, you know, it's even if you look at the company's projection, I mean, they're already borrowing money. You look at the company's projection, they're going to be cash flow negative for years to come. And here's the worst part of SpaceX, which I don't want to engage in the Captain Obvious thinking, but the thing everyone should consider, and that is the staggered lockup that the unlock that we're looking at.
Yeah.
Okay, starting from next month when the quarterly earnings come out, 20% of the shares come unlocked shortly thereafter. And then there's a whole series of unlocks, 7% every 20 or 30 days. by December, 100% of the shares will be freely floating. The important point that investors should understand is even without any change in the fundamentals, when you go from a 5% float to 100% float.
George, in the old days, when you would take a 2-hour lunch at Lockober's and you used to hold court there off the bar, but in the old days, when a company went public, it took its shares public and maybe they had a little stub they kept private. Now we're unloading 5% of the public. To me, it's manipulative. Should regulators step in and get the initial public offering market back to a normal segmentation?
100%. It's not a question of what's legal or illegal. It's just not right. Society is not well served by allowing this. Grandma's 401k is the exit liquidity for this manipulation. And I think the regulators are asleep at the wheel.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com. Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Podcast Spotlight Hour on Bloomberg Radio.
This is Odd Lots on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Joe Weisenthal.
And I'm Tracy Alloway.
Today's episode is looking at why Aldi is opening up a store right off Times Square. We are speaking with Aldi U.S. Chief Commercial Officer, Scott Patton.
So more broadly, Aldi's is, I'm not sure famous is the right word, but one of the differentiators of the grocery store is that you have fewer SKUs, right? You just have fewer products there, or you're more mindful about the products that you're actually putting on the shelves. What have you learned from that process that surprised you at all versus, say, if I go into a Walmart and I've got 60 different types of ketchup staring me in the face, including the new dill-flavored pickle one.
Which does sound good.
Yeah, tempting.
Tempting. We have 2,000 SKUs in the store, probably 4,000 varieties. Now, let's take the ketchup example. So we just talked about the typical store is going to have 30 to 40 varieties. And as you asked, we have 2. I would simply ask the customer, do you really need 40 choices for ketchups? Or is 2 good? We have organic, we have conventional. Is 2 enough? We have the right size. Do you need upside down squeeze, right side up squeeze, small glass, big glass? And what we did some, I'll call it a study, but I'll call it some interesting walks with customers through our competitors. And sometimes you would stand in front of, let's say, an olive oil selection. Ketchup is 30 to 40. Olive oil could be 50 or 60 different selections, depending on where you're shopping. And what we found was afterwards, the customers felt less confident in their purchase. So we have 4 different varieties of olive oil. 4 is a pretty good selection for our store. You're going to have organic, you're going to have Sicilian, you're going to have pure, and you're going to have extra virgin. Good selection. If you're a consumer faced with 60 different choices of olive oil, how do you know which one to buy? So they were less confident in their choice when they were trying to choose from 60. When you have 4, they felt pretty good about their selection. Unscientific for sure, but to watch the reaction on the customer's face when you walk them in front of it, they were really puzzled with which one do I buy?
This is probably an unfair question on all sides around. What do you think conventional wisdom is in the grocery store business? If I were talking to the chief commercial officer, whatever, Q-Food, what do you think the conventional wisdom is in grocery about why it's important to have 60 different olive oil SKUs?
It's about selection. The belief is that customers want these different options. And to be fair, customers do want some of those options, and it can come down to shelf space. Which suppliers are paying you to be on their shelf?
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes the more you pay, the more shelf space you get. So at Aldi, with our private label, we have 2 ketchups. There's no shelf space. There's no slotting fees. And that's a big difference. So yes, there can be selection, but we need to move those articles through the store very, very quickly.
Well, talk about this further. So again, like a hallmark of Aldi's is fewer SKUs. How does that actually feed into, I guess, more efficient processes for the grocery store and then lower prices for shoppers? You
mentioned the TV show earlier about the people, and I grew up in a grocery store. So I didn't grow up in it. So I worked there in high school, and I was paid probably $3.25 an hour to come in at night and turn the labels and stock everything forward. And me and 8 of my buddies would do that for about 6 hours. And you think about that cost. How expensive is that to do that in a grocery store? And I was in a small local grocery store. Think about a big competitor who's paying all those folks to do that. Now, our products come in, you're in the case, You only have 2,000 SKUs to put on the shelf. We're not having our folks come in and turn the labels and front everything at night. In fact, they sell out so quickly we don't need to. So that's just one example of all that cost that goes into turning those labels and pulling everything forward. We don't have that.
What does turning the labels mean? So let's walk through some math. Let's say, let's say a store sells 1,000 bottles of olive oil a day. I don't know what the number, but that's probably somewhere it sells 1,000 bottles. And let's say that store sells 500 brands of extra virgin and 500 brands of organic. And then, bottles. And then there's another store that sells 1,000 bottles of olive oil a day, but it's like 50 Sicilian, 50 organic, 50 extra virgin, 50 whatever. Walk us through the math of why 1,000 bottles with the 2 SKUs is going to be significantly more efficient and cheaper from a store perspective than 1,000 bottles with more SKUs.
So when the truck comes in at a traditional grocery store, let's say you have 50 different SKUs, you have to restock them all. That's 50 different cases you have to open. You have to find the 50 different cases. You have to match it up to the spot on the shelf, restock it, make sure you have the right one, get the labels all turned the right way, get the bottles all square. You don't want to drop any. So you have 50 different options. So one person is sitting there with a cart with 50 different cases trying to match them to the right spot on the shelf. Come to the Aldi store. We have olive oil, we have 4. You can very clearly see this one goes right here. So we can literally restock all of our olive oil in probably 2% of the time that it takes to stock another store. So just think about the math on trying to put that puzzle together of 50 different varieties compared to 4.
Your price labels are digital, right?
We are.
Most, if not all of your stores now?
All of our stores are digital.
All of the stores. Okay. How does that help with labor costs? And then also, I have to ask, there's been a lot of criticism of some of these digital labels because people think they're dynamic pricing and that as they reach for an avocado, the price is going to go up by $2 or whatever. How should we think about those?
Yeah, so let me handle that part first. We've heard those same criticisms or concerns out there. We do not do dynamic pricing. We would never do dynamic pricing. Actually, all of our stores have the same price. We change them usually once a week or so, depending on what's going on in the produce market.
Wait, even the New York store would have the same prices?
Same price in New York as out in Connecticut. And I know that's going to be
it's hard for me personally to believe.
We'll call it a pleasant surprise for those in Manhattan.
Yeah.
When they walk in and they see, chicken breast for $2.19 a pound or eggs for $1.47. So it's going to be kind of amazing. But when we talk about the electronic shelf labels, we were spending between 3 and 4 hours per store per week to change out our signs. So when we switch to the digital version, we save all of that labor. So again, 2,600 stores times 4 hours a week. You can do the math on that. Think about all that savings. Again, that's how we get chicken breast down to $2.19. But the opportunity is there to abuse that system, but we will not do that.
So just to be clear, I mean, the reason you were changing out physical labels is because the prices were changing, but you're not changing them on a minute to minute kind of basis.
No, we would usually change them once a week. We have the Aldi Finds area where those come in. We have 100 new items every week. I don't know if we'll talk about that, but we'd have to put all those signs out, take the old signs down. That's a lot of labor to do those things, but we don't have to do that anymore.
This was something I did not know about prior to yesterday's field trip. So the Aldi Find section, I guess apparently your fans have dubbed that the Isle of Shame.
They have.
Right? So this is where some brilliant merchandise, like a true showman, a merchandiser has figured out something. So explain what this aisle is and why it's so iconic to so many. There's like a 4 million person Facebook group dedicated to this specific aisle. Where did this come from, this aisle, the so-called Isle of Shame?
So it actually, to explain the concept, you walk into a grocery store, you're expecting to buy groceries, your soup, your sushi, all those types of things. And we have a whole aisle that's a lot of general merchandise. So we're going to have swimming pools. We're going to have
a lot of seasonal stuff.
Yeah, seasonal. Right now, 4th of July is coming up. FIFA World Cup's in town, so we have those articles as well. The origins of that actually goes back to our origins in Europe. So if you think about European, I know if you've been to Europe, they don't have a lot of the competitors that we have here, a lot of the big box stores.
Right.
So Aldi actually had a pretty big business and still has a significant business selling these types of general merchandise. It could be DIY, it could be paint, it could be power tools. So we took that concept when we came to the U.S., and it's been pretty successful. Now, how it's different in the U.S. is it's still very unique that you're going to have all of these articles right next to your groceries. So what we do is we bring in about 100 new items every week. And they're going to be, I'll call it random, but not so random. They're actually going to be the items you need when you need them. So we're not going to carry these articles all year long. We're not going to have an inflatable pool in February. If you look at the competition, they will have that sitting on the shelf. So we bring in the inflatable pool right when you need it. So back to your comment on the Isle of Shame, which I will say we do have a Facebook group started by our fans, and it's called the Isle of Shame, or AOS. And this popped up, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. And we started looking at that as a business saying, what is going on here? What is happening in this Isle of Shame? And as a retailer, you're always worried about your brand. You're concerned about your brand. And you see this growing Facebook group called the Isle of Shame. And you have to ask yourself, what are we going to do about that? So it is 100% driven by our fans. And really what happens is our customers come in each week. They start posting back and forth. Oh, look what I got. I got the pool. I got the chainsaw. I got whatever it is. And they're having a lot of fun with these things. And this group has grown to over 4 million users on a regular basis. So origins of Isle of Shame, pretty interesting. People were posting onto Facebook, hey, I went to Aldi. I got my ketchup. I got my barbecue sauce. I got my olive oil. And I also got these cute athletic shoes. And then they were like, I'm so ashamed. I didn't stay on budget. I'm so ashamed. So they were posting these shame photos from trunks of their cars, from their kitchens. We sell a tremendous amount of candles. People were posting their family rooms with 50, 60, 70 different candles of all the shame.
I love a good scented candle. I fully admit my basicness when it comes to scented candles. But...
So it was shame in a good way. So I think as a brand, we've said, okay, let's not fight this. It's great because people love it. So it's the Isle of Shame. It's the Aldi finds. And we love that our fans want to post about it and talk about it. And we learn from this as well. So like I said, I run the buying department and we have great buyers out there. They watch this all of the time.
You've been in this business for a long time. It feels like one of the things that's happened, I can't even say relatively recently, but in recent-ish years, is that social media has become such a bigger force when it comes to shopping. So you have Facebook groups like the one you just described, and you can watch those and maybe get a sense of what customers are liking. You also have social media trends. So every once in a while you have a food item or an Alison Roman recipe that goes viral, and suddenly everyone wants to buy new tomatoes or a particular type of cheese. How has that impacted the buying process for you?
Certainly, we have to pay attention to those trends. And you mentioned the feta cheese and tomato recipe from a few years ago. Our feta cheese sales went through the roof. So we had to work very quickly with our suppliers to get more feta. More recently, one is the sourdough trend. So sourdough baking at home, the sourdough trend. Now, sourdough is not easy. You got to feed your starter. I would love to do it. I don't have the patience for it. But that tells us and our buying team, hey, what's going on with sourdough? So now we've launched a couple of sourdough items a couple of years ago. It's actually the top performing item in the bread set now. So we are selling, over 500,000 loaves of sourdough every single week in our stores.
Wait, so when you suddenly see feta flying off the shelves, how long does it take you to actually figure out what's going on here and what's driving the additional demand? And then how long does it take for you to respond to it?
And that's one of the great things about being private label, because we're in control of our label. We're in control of our supply chain. We work directly with our producers. So if we were a brand, we'd have to call them and say, hey, can we get more of your brand that you're sending to every other retailer? We go directly to the manufacturer. We say, look, how can we get more line time? How can you dedicate more Aldi product? What can we do with packaging? It can be as quick as a couple of months. It can take a little bit longer depending on the item. But being a private label, we can just pick up the phone, call directly that supplier. Oftentimes it's the owner, the president of the company, and say, look, what can we do about feta? How can we expand your sourdough line? What can we do to help you? And then we partner with them.
More to come from our conversation on how to open a low-price grocery store in the middle of Manhattan. We are speaking with Aldi U.S. Chief Commercial Officer Scott Patton. I'm Tracy Alloway.
And I'm Joe Weisenthal, and this is Odd Lots on Bloomberg Radio.
To hear all of our episodes in full, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
This is your only 24-hour source for world markets and breaking business news. Bloomberg Radio. Coming up, the latest market-moving headlines from Bloomberg. First, an update from our partners at ABC News.
ABC News, I'm Brian Clark. The news of Senator Lindsey Graham's death at 71 has shocked Washington. President Trump tells CNN Face the Nation.
There was no better advocate. He was a fantastic advocate in the Senate, and he could do things that other people, he was able to. If I had a really big problem with a certain Democrat, he could work it out.
Senator died from what his staff called a brief and sudden illness. Now, South Carolina's governor will name a replacement for the rest of Graham's term. South Carolina Republicans will choose a new candidate to run in November's election. President Trump said the Strait of Hormuz is open, even as Iran says it's closed after the U.S. struck targets in Iran for a third straight night as a week of uncertainty about the state of the peace agreement continues. The containment of the Summit fire in Los Angeles County has grown to 15%. There are nearly 600 people under evacuation orders or warnings. Other parts of the Rocky Mountain region could experience record high temperatures today. This is ABC News.
And I'm Monica Ricks in the Bloomberg newsroom. Here are some of the stories we're watching. The Joint Maritime Information Center says the Strait of Hormuz's southern route remains open to shipping this morning, despite Iran declaring the waterway closed in the region after trading a wave of new attacks with the U.S. That could cause oil prices to spike when trading starts, but for now, crude oil futures sit at $76 a barrel. 5 of the largest U.S. banks are set to release earnings on Tuesday, with Bank of America, J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, and Citi all reporting within the same hour. Herman Chan is a senior analyst with Bloomberg Intelligence.
Banks have really shrugged off some of these geoeconomic issues and the K-shaped economy that we continue to hear about. There's really strong earnings power, both on the trading side, the investment banking side, and on the lending side. Your typical bread and butter commercial lending is really strong. So about 20% year-over-year growth. We're looking for really good results overall.
That's Herman Chan on Bloomberg this weekend. Later in the week, Netflix kicks off tech earnings as the streaming platform struggles with slowing growth and an increasingly fragmented industry. Meta unveiled a new AI model called Muse Spark this week, but it's already been removed from apps like Instagram following backlash and copyright concerns. The feature used public users' photos and likeness to create AI images without their consent. The Seattle Seahawks have a new owner. Here's Bloomberg's Ed Kalegi.
Tech billionaire Vinod Khosla has reached an agreement to buy the Seattle Seahawks for $9.6 billion. This according to people familiar with the details. It's one of the largest valuations ever for a sports team in a control transaction, nearing the $10 billion price tag in Mark Walters' purchase of the NBA's Los Angeles Lakers. The India-born Khosla, who is a prominent venture capitalist, is worth about $13.7 billion according to Forbes. He is buying the defending Super Bowl champions from the estate of late owner Paul Allen. Ed Kalegi, Bloomberg Radio.
Owners plan to meet next month to approve it. And as we've been reporting today, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham has died at 71. According to NBC, emergency workers responded to a call for cardiac arrest at his home in Washington last night. Graham had served in the Senate for more than 2 decades and had been seeking a 5th term. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg.
Sometimes the difference between stability and homelessness is just one unexpected bill. Maybe it's a car that won't start, a medical emergency, or the cost of a loved one's funeral. At St. Vincent de Paul, Cincinnati, we provide emergency rent and utility assistance so that families can afford to stay in their homes. It's simple. Prevention costs less and means more. Your gift can prevent homelessness before it starts. Give today at svdpcincinnati.org. St. Vincent de Paul, neighbors helping neighbors.
Get the news you need to start your day in just 15 minutes.
Let's begin with the race to the midterms.
An escalation in tensions between the U.S. and Iran.
Wake up with Bloomberg Daybreak U.S. Edition.
The Ebola virus continues to spread in Congo.
Upsets at the World Cup.
Available now on your podcast feed. Each weekday morning at 6 a.m. Eastern.
The biggest IPO of all time.
Subscribe to Bloomberg Daybreak U.S. Edition on Apple, Spotify, and everywhere you get your podcasts. Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything.
Stacey Vanek Smith here from Everybody's Business. This week on the podcast, we talk about the energy shortage.
So much has come online that it's eaten up all the excess supply. And so now the grid is under stress in a couple of short years. We're facing a shortfall next year if things don't turn around in terms of demand projections. So on that level, it's not that the household is competing with it, but somebody has to pay for the new supply.
Listen to Everybody's Business from Bloomberg Business Week, wherever you get your podcasts.
The Big Take, a daily podcast from Bloomberg and iHeartRadio, highlighting the best reporting by Bloomberg News from around the globe.
How is the American farmer doing?
Calls to tax the rich.
Does China tech even need U.S. money now?
Each weekday, we dig into one important story and tell you why it matters.
A new 20th anniversary iPhone.
Predicting where AI is going next.
Listen to The Big Take on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, the Bloomberg Business app, or wherever you listen.
Gain insight on the innovators, disruptors, and tech-driven trends shaping today's complex economy. I'm Carol Masser.
And I'm Tim Stenevec. Wrap up your workday with the Bloomberg Business Week Daily Podcast.
We bring you deeper dives into the stories shaping your world, from the evolution of AI to the shifting priorities of global business.
Plus, Silicon Valley power players and the latest tech trends.
Catch up on the conversations you missed during the day.
Subscribe to the Bloomberg Business Week Daily Podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you listen.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. When's the last time you had a good time?
America appears to be suffering from a fun shortage.
Ben Steverman wrote the story for Bloomberg Business Week.
Well, we're thinking about fun as shared experiences, things that get people off their phone, out of their houses, and doing things together.
With the search for fun tougher to find.
There is a shortage of opportunities to do that, to go have fun with other people, from sports to live concerts to nightlife.
Take out affordability, it's also a question of access.
We've lost something like 2,000 golf courses over the last 2 decades, 7,000 bars and nightclubs. Americans own more than 1 million fewer boats. It's expensive to open a new summer camp. It's almost impossible to open a new beachfront resort or marina.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics says the U.S. has lost 1/5 of its movie theaters and almost 1/3 of its bowling alleys since 2001. I'm Charlie Pellett, Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest edition of the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast, a conversation with George Ferguson, our senior aerospace, defense, and airlines analyst, on earnings from Delta Airlines.
Delta, United, and to a lesser extent American are going to probably be the best part of the story this quarter. And I think Delta showed some resilience in the revenue lines, right? And I think, you have to remember, this is a pretty diversified, from a revenue standpoint, company. They have maintenance business that brought in some great double-digit gains. They had cargo, they had loyalty that all sort of brought in gains, and basic lagged a little. But I think generally the story was pretty good on the revenue front. They grew less than United and American, so I think that means they could support some of those higher fares. They were like at 1% seat count growth. We're going to see United, I think, come in closer to 6%. We're going to see American around 3-ish. So I think this might be the best part, again, of the revenue story for U.S. airlines as we get into this earnings season. And one of the challenges, I think, too, in growing a little slower on the capacity front is that some of their costs ballooned a little bit. But look, again, I think they made some good ground. They haven't totally compensated for higher fuel prices.
How is a cabin changing within the industry these days?
They're focusing on the well-heeled consumer. You're a retiree, and again, I think, Delta has shown some success on that front. And I would expect you're going to see the same out of United and American, but to a lesser extent.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Podcast Spotlight Hour on Bloomberg Radio.
You're listening to the Odd Lots podcast on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Joe Weisenthal.
And I'm Tracy Alloway.
On today's show, we are discussing what it takes to meaningfully reduce the cost of groceries in a given grocery store location. We are speaking with Aldi U.S. Chief Commercial Officer Scott Patton. I had never gone into an Aldi before, and I'm not sure I would have noticed it had you not pointed it out. But then once you pointed it out, it was quite obvious. So, for example, like on a bag of chips, you have really big barcodes, and either in some boxes, then you notice had a barcode on every surface. and some had really big barcodes. And it's like, okay, I get that. That's intuitive. It makes the swiping faster. Give us a little history of barcode innovation, and how do you actually sort of measure the optimal, I guess, ratio of adding barcodes and figuring out how much that could contribute to faster throughput versus adding barcodes and then, like, you can't even see what the product is. So finding that sort of efficient frontier of
I'm thinking back in the age of when cashiers were memorizing grocery prices, do you think that had an impact on the monetary policy transmission mechanism? Do you think price increases didn't filter down into
because it would have just been too burdensome on the company to make their employees like do another memorization?
Someone needs to do a paper.
Yeah, we should.
Okay, obvious question though. The barcode thing, it kind of blew my mind because, as you said, I never noticed it before. How come other grocery stores or other brands don't do something similar?
Because we're private label, these are our products, and we use that real estate. We design the labels. We design the brands. We control the ingredients. We design the labels. So for us, we're based on efficiency. I would say some of our competitors aren't as focused on that. It does take up real estate on the package. There's no doubt about it. But the fact that nobody notices it is pretty interesting as well. So for us, it's strictly productivity. And since we control the product and the packaging, we can put 20 barcodes if we wanted to.
But if I'm like a Haagen-Dazs or something and I'm designing my box of ice cream sandwiches or whatever it is, I would be reluctant to give up some of that additional space to barcodes, you think?
I think so. I mean, if you're a brand, you want to talk about the products and you want to have the romance copy and you want to tell the history of the product. I think they're more focused on that than the retailer's productivity. We're focused on the productivity so we can get the savings for the customer. But you're absolutely right. Adding romance copy and all those great words on the back of the
is that what you call it?
It's called,
it's called romance copy.
I have often felt feelings of romance as I read the back of ice cream packages.
Do you ever like those things? It'll be like Bob and Joe's corn chips. And it's like, the story will be like, Bob was working at Goldman Sachs and realized, why am I devoting my life to M&A when I could be devoting it to like design bake? I'm not a fan. I always think I do not need romance copy.
You need to know the origin story of your potato chips, Joe.
You need more barcodes.
Yeah. Talk to us about what you see in this current state of the art of self-checkout. And the reason there are a couple of things I ask, because, for example, Uniqlo, which is where I buy a lot of my clothes, I love their self-checkout. But there's clothes, there's not grocery. But you dump all of the clothes into a bucket, it spits out a price, probably like RFD or whatever. It's done. It's that. And then, so my local Key Foods, you're like doing the thing where you're twisting. Half the time, like someone has to come by and like swipe something. Maybe something will need an age verification. It doesn't really quite seem to work yet. And so I'm curious what you're seeing at Aldi in terms of where we are with self-checkout technology. I think it kind of drives people crazy.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, some people love it, some people don't love it. And for all the reasons that you said, RFID hasn't come to grocery yet. RFID is a pretty expensive technology when you're talking about selling avocados and tomatoes. So RFID hasn't quite made it there yet. even the best self-checkout, you're going to have an age verification for alcohol purchases. You're going to struggle sometimes to weigh the produce. So we have it in about a third of our stores. I think some customers love it, but in our stores that have self-checkout, we always have an employee checkout as well. And that's the option to the consumer. I think we're still learning. Retailers are figuring out what works best for them. Do you want a corral? Do you want an attendant? What's the best layout?
What's corral?
So you might want to move people through more of a line, or do you want more of a separated area? So the layout of the self-checkout can have a pretty big impact on the effectiveness. How many people are monitoring it? And by the time you pay someone to stand there and monitor it, could you have just scanned their groceries for them?
Yeah.
Those are the questions that I think all the retailers are facing right now.
How many different types of green grapes are there? We talked about this yesterday, and let's go back to that. You go to the farmers, you pick a grape. Like, how many different options are you looking at, et cetera? Novelty, and we talked about this again with tomatoes. They always seem to be coming out with new tomatoes. Where are we at with the grape market?
Yeah, so the grape market is fascinating because for the average consumer, which we are all average consumers, right? You have green grapes and you have red grapes. You go to the store, you want green, you like red, and you ask a customer, I like the green ones, I like the red ones. But when you get into the details, like I said, we have an awesome produce buying team. There's over 100 varieties of green grapes. So when you go to the Aldi store or the competitor next door, likely you're going to have 2 different varieties. Now, each of those varieties has a different flavor profile, different yield. The higher the yield, sometimes the less the flavor. So there's trade-offs on all those types of things. So what we do, we work with the growers. We mentioned this earlier. We figure, what's the best flavor profile? We don't want the customer to have to think about it. We want them to come to our store, come to Aldi and say, I love the Aldi green grapes, or I love the blackberries. I love the blackberries, and they don't know the details behind it.
Those blackberries were huge.
They were big,
the ones
and
we
they
sampled
didn't have
yesterday.
that sort of tart that sometimes
the sourness,
make you pucker.
yeah.
And that's another example of picking the variety. So if we were just buying off the market, you're just going down to the local produce market and saying, give me whatever blackberries you have, you're going to get what they have available. Working with the grower, you can narrow that 100 varieties of green grapes down to the 1 or 2 you want to have in your stores. What's in season, what's going to have the right flavor profile. We don't want it too sour. You don't want it too sweet. You want to have good shelf life. Produce waste, all those types of things go into the decisions of our produce team. It's actually pretty sophisticated. And it's fine the customers take it for granted. We just want them to come in and say, these green grapes are great. But we've done all the work to figure that out with the farmers.
I want to ask at least one, what Aldi can tell us about the macro environment right now type question. So one of the stories that we've been talking about on the show, and lots of other people have as well, is high produce prices, higher beef prices, certainly, general inflationary pressures on the consumer. And I'm very curious if you've seen that in the spend at your own stores, if you've maybe seen smaller basket sizes, or maybe you've seen people trading down from beef to chicken, that sort of thing. What are you seeing in terms of inflationary pressures on your shoppers?
Yeah, so shoppers are, I think, they've been under pressure for several years now. And for all the reasons we talked about before, whether it's the case design or the UPCs or going straight to the farmer, we try to keep all those cost pressures down, but we're not immune. We're not immune to commodity markets. You mentioned beef, for instance. Beef prices are at 70-year highs. So we still see our customers buying beef. However, I'll give you an example. Ground beef right now is relatively expensive by historical context. You can talk $5.99 or $6.99 a pound, even at the Aldi store for ground beef. What we've seen is some consumers opting for ground turkey or ground chicken. A nice substitute, a good quality product, still fresh, probably 30% cheaper or 40% less expensive. And that's a good option. Customers are still going to buy their protein. Protein is all the craze right now. But we have seen some switching between maybe a higher protein, expensive protein like beef, and a lower cost like chicken.
Say a lot's changed in the last 10 years on all kinds of levels. We could talk about the role of social media. We could talk about, obviously, COVID and the inflation, or just COVID and how that made sourdough bread a thing, the hobby. But GLP-1's clearly part of the story, I think, with the protein boom. What are some sort of like clear data points that you see where you say, okay, like the GLP-1s are changing consumer buying behavior, other than just say, yes, they want more protein?
Yeah, so GLP-1s, we worked with some of our partners probably 18 months ago. And I think it was roughly 5% of the population at that time was on GLP-1s. We'd have to check that. But they also said when this goes to pill form, which is happening right now, we're going to see that adoption rate go up. So as GLP-1s are coming into pill form, of course, we're seeing more protein sales. What's interesting is if you talk to the meat team and the meat growers out there, they would say we're the original protein. And of course, we're selling more of that. But what we're seeing is protein really go throughout the store. Protein bagels.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about protein popcorn, which there's going to be a point when it comes too far. We're rolling out a protein sparkling water. So our data points would say it's actually quite tasty. When you take a protein sparkling water, anything with protein right now is accelerating. I think there'll be a pullback at some point.
Yeah, so the pendulum needs to swing to fiber. Americans need more fiber, not more protein.
Yeah, fiber is coming on as well. Okay, you can have fiber. Bean sales are actually up significantly.
Really? Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we're selling significantly more beans.
Wait, is that a GLP-1 thing as well?
It's a fiber. It's a fiber protein combo. Yeah, so we have a Greek chickpea that we've just rolled out, which is actually amazing. And I would say 2 years ago, we wouldn't have carried a Greek chickpea. But now we've rolled out a Greek chickpea, high in fiber. Customers are responding to it. We're rolling out a fiber water, but you're right. More protein, more fiber. And for us, it's making sure we have the products the customers want and being on trend. But bean sales, 5 years ago, bean sales weren't surging. But we're seeing a resurgence in some of these categories that maybe weren't thriving in the past, but now they're starting to come back to life.
That might also be inflationary pressure, because one of the greatest value meals, most filling meals you can ever make is red beans and rice, as I like to say. This has been Odd Thoughts on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Tracy Alloway.
And I'm Joe Weisenthal.
To hear the rest of this episode and all of our other interviews, be sure to subscribe to Odd Thoughts wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. Powered by more than 3,000 journalists and analysts in over 100 bureaus around the world. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, an update from our partners at ABC News.
From ABC News, I'm Mike Tobuski. Flags at the White House and the Capitol building are at half staff today as tributes continue to pour in for Lindsey Graham, who died overnight from a brief and sudden illness, according to his office. President Trump calling his passing devastating on CNN. House Speaker Mike Johnson said Graham advocated tirelessly for American strength and exceptionalism. Vice President J.D. Vance, meanwhile, saying he was a one-of-a-kind figure in our politics.
The news is stunning to his colleagues. Lindsey Graham was just in Ukraine late last week. He was due to appear on Meet the Press this morning. The president on social media calls his congressional ally and frequent golfing partner one of the greatest people and senators I've ever known. In addition to his 4 terms in the Senate and 4 terms in the House, Graham also served for over 3 decades in the Air Force and Air Force Reserve, retiring with the rank of colonel. He was a national security hawk who argued for action against Iran and said in 2022 that Vladimir Putin should be taken out.
ABC's Stephen Portnoy. Lindsey Graham was 71. CENTCOM says U.S. forces launched a 3rd round of strikes on Iran this weekend in retaliation for Tehran's attack on a container ship in the Strait of Hormuz yesterday. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps says that crucial waterway is closed amid the fighting, something UN Ambassador Mike Waltz disputed on ABC's This Week.
I think Iran is still very much of the mindset that it can use the global economy as some type of leverage.
Meanwhile, talks in Oman to end the war in Iran draw to a close without any signs of an immediate breakthrough. ABC's Allison Cossack.
Tensions between the U.S. and Iran have been escalating, but President Trump gave the green light for a new round of talks with Iran. But U.S. officials tell ABC News U.S. representatives were not present for this latest round of negotiations.
And officials in Los Angeles County now say they've been able to stop the forward progress of the Summit fire, which is now 15% contained. You're listening to ABC News.
Now, Bloomberg Radio weather on SiriusXM 121.
We'll likely see some travel problems later this afternoon into and out of the Little Rock area. Temperatures in Little Rock are going to be near 91. Showers, thunderstorms will also cause problems this afternoon and into the evening around the New Orleans area. Temperatures in New Orleans should be near 92. If you're headed to or from Charlotte, there may be some showers and thunderstorms mid to late afternoon that start to produce delays. Temperatures in Charlotte are going to be near 91. Those of you headed to or from Raleigh, watch for showers and thunderstorms producing some afternoon delays. Temperatures in Raleigh near 93. Nashville may be another trouble spot this afternoon with scattered showers and thunderstorms. The temperatures in Nashville near 86. Look for problems to start to develop sometime this afternoon in the Atlanta area due to showers and thunderstorms, 90 in Atlanta. I'm Rob Carolyn, and that's your Bloomberg Travelers Forecast. Now back to the latest headlines from ABC News.
A vigil last night in Houston following the death of Lorenzo Araujo. He was the 52-year-old undocumented immigrant who was shot and killed by an ICE agent this week while on his way to work. Hani Khalil, the executive director of the Texas Gulf Coast AFL-CIO, spoke at the gathering.
In unmarked vehicles, with no warrant to arrest him, without lights on, drove him off the road and shot him in broad daylight. Shame. Shame on them.
The Department of Homeland Security has admitted Araja was not their target, but resembled the person they were looking for. The semifinals for the World Cup is now set after Argentina bested Switzerland last night. They'll take on England on Wednesday. France, meanwhile, squares off against Spain on Tuesday. It was the running of the bulls this weekend in New Orleans. Minus the bulls, participants of the city's 20th annual San Fermin Festival, dressed in traditional white and red clothing while being chased through the streets by roller skaters acting as bulls. Angela Marshall took part this year.
It is quite different. I feel like this is a much easier, gentle version. I know we have a lot of fun hitting people, but it's much better deal to get hit by a little fat plastic bat than get hit by a bull with horns.
That event in New Orleans raises thousands of dollars for charity every year. I'm Mike Dubusky, ABC News.
And I'm Monica Ricks in the Bloomberg newsroom. Here are some of the stories we're watching. Crude oil futures close lower ahead of the weekend, but could soar to start the trading week as the U.S. ramps up attacks on Iran in the Middle East. Iran's declared the Strait of Hormuz closed until further notice and launched assaults on at least 5 American allies across the region. Those retaliatory attacks are now casting significant doubts on imminent peace talks to end the war. The hiring boom expected from the FIFA World Cup in the U.S. may not materialize after all, with payrolls and employment in the leisure and hospitality sector down by some 21,000 over the past 2 months. Expensive hotels and ticket prices have raised concerns about the eventual boost, with geopolitical tensions, higher airfares, and other barriers potentially limiting international travel. Fed Chair Kevin Warsh is set to testify on Capitol Hill over 2 days this week, beginning with an appearance before the House Financial Services Committee on Tuesday. Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet has details.
We know what Warsh will say in the central bank's semi-annual monetary policy report to Congress. It was released Friday in Washington. What we don't know is how he will respond to questions on a range of topics from lawmakers. The report is the first under the new Fed chair, and it sends an upbeat message about the economy. It describes growth as solid and productivity as strong while finding little sign of risk in the banking system. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
Earnings season also kicks off this week with reports expected from J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Goldman Sachs on Tuesday. Morgan Stanley reports on Wednesday. And we should get some economic data, including the June Consumer Price Index, retail sales data, and production, inflation, and jobs numbers. Jobless claims are expected to remain pretty flat this month. A group led by tech billionaire Vinod Khosla has agreed to buy the Seattle Seahawks in a deal that's expected to set an NFL record. Terms haven't been disclosed, but Sportico values the deal at $9.6 billion. Owners are said to be meeting in late August to approve it. And as we've been reporting, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham has died, according to his office, from a brief and sudden illness. Graham served in the Senate for more than 2 decades and had been in Ukraine as recently as Friday before returning to Washington. He was 71 years old. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg.
Get the latest news from around the world delivered to you in an instant.
Subscribe to Bloomberg News Now and get news when you want it on your schedule.
These are short audio reports on the day's top stories that you can listen to in just a few minutes.
Make Bloomberg News Now your trusted source for the latest global headlines with context.
It's available 24 hours a day, anytime you need it, right on your smartphone or smart speakers.
Subscribe to Bloomberg News Now today on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen.
Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Podcast Spotlight Hour on Bloomberg Radio.
You're listening to the Big Take Podcast on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Sarah Holder, and today on the show, we speak with Madison Muller and Amanda Mull about the unregulated peptides that claim to make you tanner, thinner, and stronger, and why they might become even more mainstream under the Trump administration.
Essentially, if you have a health concern or problem, whether that's a physical problem or a cosmetic or aesthetic one, there is probably a peptide for that.
That's Madison Muller, who covers the pharmaceutical industry for Bloomberg. Recently, she's been hearing a lot about a specific kind of drug, peptides. I've been hearing a lot about them too. They seem to be everywhere.
Now to the injectable peptides craze sweeping social media.
If you're in your 30s and you're not incorporating peptides into your skincare routine, why not?
At the most basic level, peptides are chains of amino acids that bind to receptors in the body to turn processes on and off. Peptides are used in lots of different drugs, and they promise all kinds of transformative benefits.
They will make you theoretically tan, beautiful, snatched, pain-free, well-rested.
That's Amanda Mull, a senior reporter for Bloomberg Businessweek. She says some of the most popular peptide-based drugs are ones you probably recognize, like GLP-1s for weight loss and insulin.
Some of the substances that we're talking about are like extremely well researched, extremely widely used, safe, effective, and they come from pharmaceutical companies that have large, well-inspected facilities for producing peptide drugs in large quantities.
But there are a lot of other peptide-based injectables that are largely unregulated.
There's a lot of substances that have not been trialed extensively in humans, or hardly at all in humans for some of them. They do not come generally from large pharmaceutical companies in the US. They are imported sort of as research materials. The sale of them is generally illegal for human use.
But Amanda says right now, the underground peptide trade is booming.
You could buy some in a minute or two if you got out your credit card right now.
Already, investors estimate that this peptide black market is worth $1 to $3 billion. But it might not be a black market for long, because the U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services is himself a peptide enthusiast.
I mean, I'm a big fan of peptides. I've used them myself and used them with really good effect.
That's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on Joe Rogan's podcast in the summer of 2023. Kennedy has been pushing the FDA to take a closer look at the drugs, in part because he says he wants to divert demand away from what he's called a dangerous black market. That could potentially pave the way for state-regulated compounding pharmacies to make some peptides legally.
If all of these things get put into legal compounding in the US, that probably expands a lot of people's risk tolerance and willingness to try them, because they're coming from like a certified facility, they're, traceable, they're, it just brings it out of the shadows a little bit.
I'm Sarah Holder, and this is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. Today on the show, inside the billion-dollar peptide craze, how the drugs moved into the mainstream, and what regulation would mean for telehealth companies, big pharma, and the alternative wellness industry. What's the origin story for these drugs that use peptides?
Well, peptides have actually been around for a long time. They sort of became popular on like the fringes of the fitness and the bodybuilding community. And over time, they've sort of seeped into more of the mainstream culture.
If you are like looking for an inflection point, it is probably like 2021, 2022, when people beyond the sort of like type 2 diabetes patient community started to become aware that Ozempic and then Mounjaro were really great for weight loss. That started to become, something that people wrote about in like culture magazines and on blogs and like on Reddit. So people started to look for options to receive these drugs.
Mm-hmm. People were seeking out GLP-1 drugs from compounded pharmacies or medical spas. And once they got comfortable sort of taking a medication that was not necessarily a branded, pharmaceutical product, some of these med spas, some of these doctors started recommending other things. So let's try BPC 157 or let's try GHKCU. All of these sort of sound like alphabet soup of various letters and numbers and things. But people got comfortable with the idea, one, of injecting themselves with something because of the GLP-1s, and then also taking something that didn't come from a brand name pharmaceutical company. Mm-hmm. And we're also seeing right now, a lot of people who are big personalities, podcasters, biohackers, sort of talking about various like experimentation that they're doing with their own health. We have people like Brian Johnson that have a lot of followers, have gotten a lot of attention. Joe Rogan's talked about peptides on his podcast. And so that's, again, sort of thrust them into like the mainstream culture more, and people just being more willing to sort of get healthcare from outside of the traditional healthcare system, outside of what doctors are prescribing them, and sort of taking it into their own hands, sometimes in an extreme way.
Amanda and Madison talked to several people who've recently started using peptides. It's not all biohackers and looks maxers. It's people like Christy Turner, a therapist from Indiana.
I honestly think GLP-1s have just been a gateway drug to peptides.
Christy started using Zepbound, a GLP-1, in May of 2024. She credits the drug with helping her lose 200 pounds in 2 years.
I've had a pretty charmed Disney experience on Zepbound, really.
Then, about a year ago, Christy started using GHKCU, which helps with the skin sagging that often accompanies massive weight loss. And more recently, she's also started taking glutathione, which is supposed to boost her immune system. US regulators don't permit GHKCU to be compounded in its injectable form. But Christy's doctor, a functional medicine practitioner and osteopath with her own independent practice, sources the drugs from compounding pharmacies that are willing to make them. Compounding pharmacies are state-regulated facilities that are licensed to make customized versions of drugs. Christy sees her doctor remotely and trusts her advice.
She always does a good job of educating me on what it is, not just saying you should take it, but she says, hey, if this is a concern, here's information on it. Let me know what you think. I looked at her stuff and then I did a lot of research on my own, and I really just didn't feel like the risks were significant for me to take. I mean, I just really didn't feel like I had risk really at it.
Her story, to me, is sort of a case study in how people's risk tolerance expands.
Bloomberg's Amanda Mulligan.
And how, like, somebody who wants to do things the very traditional, very by the book way, can sort of have their mind opened to doing things that are sort of beyond that original risk tolerance because of the sort of networks of trust and relationships that they have to these drugs.
The reason there's this huge underground market for peptides is that, aside from high-profile drugs like GLP-1s, most have not been approved for clinical use in the US. Some of the peptides we're seeing today were first developed by pharma companies, but weren't projected to be safe or effective or profitable enough to be put through the FDA approval process. For a lot of them, that means they haven't gone through robust, long-term safety testing. And in the world of drugs, unlike, say, supplements or cosmetics, unapproved essentially means illegal.
In 2023, the Biden administration, FDA, decided to put many of these peptides on a list that explicitly banned compounding pharmacies from putting them in drugs for consumers, even with a valid prescription. But before that, it was just sort of like they were illegal because they weren't explicitly made legal in some way. And so as they became more common online, the Biden administration said, we know that this is becoming more popular. We will enforce against this. That got some of the compounding pharmacies that had been dabbling in this, it got some of them out of the business.
And this almost sounds like a naive question, but how are people getting them anyway then?
It is so easy to order anything that you want online these days. So that's part of it, is people are ordering what is considered research use only chemicals sort of online, a lot of times from China or other overseas suppliers.
It's not technically illegal to possess these chemicals, and you can sell them as long as you're not marketing them as medicine. So black market peptide vendors will often market their products as research chemicals, not for human consumption.
It shouldn't be a loophole, but it is. It's people or some businesses think that by labeling something as research use only, it sort of shields them from liability of like actually selling something or importing something into the US that people are not supposed to be taking.
So what is being imported and sold to consumers in the case of these black market peptides is active pharmaceutical ingredients. You get the powdered version of these active ingredients that is then imported. And with peptide drugs, the powdered active ingredient, the only really difference between that and like a finished usable drug is reconstitution with like a type of sterile water that then makes it injectable. So you've got this powder coming in that is pretty easy to teach people how to use once you can get it into their hands.
And buyers often don't know what's in these research use only chemicals. So their rise has also led to a growing demand for companies that test these peptides.
As more and more people have heard about them, and the only way to get a lot of them is through this sort of trade with American resellers of Chinese peptide ingredients. More and more people have said, like, wait, can you show me something that proves that like this powder is what you say it is and it's not fentanyl or something like that?
When U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was asked about peptides on the Joe Rogan Show in June of 2023, he said he was a fan.
He's peptide positive, I would say.
That's Amanda Mulligan.
He said that he has taken peptides, that he had a good experience with them, that he thinks they're very interesting.
Yeah, and a lot of the people in RFK's circle are also peptide positive. A lot of these figures within the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again movement, have some sort of relationship to or have talked about taking peptides themselves. So there's a lot of chatter right now sort of from these circles as well that have become increasingly influential in this administration.
Madison Muller says all these peptide positive vibes could soon lead to a seismic change for the industry.
So there's basically going to be a advisory committee meeting at the end of July in which a group of independent experts will review the evidence, which there isn't much evidence to review, and basically make a non-binding recommendation to the FDA and to HHS about whether these should be legalized, whether they should be sort of categorized differently to allow compounding pharmacies to make them in a legal way in the U.S.
This FDA committee is expected to recommend that 7 peptides be added to the list of substances available for legal use in compounding pharmacies, with another 5 to be considered for inclusion by early 2027. This has been the Big Take Podcast on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Sarah Holder, and I spoke with Madison Muller and Amanda Mull about peptides, the unregulated drugs that claim to make you tanner, thinner, and stronger, and why they might become even more mainstream under the Trump administration. You can hear the rest of the episode on The Big Take, wherever you get your podcasts.
And I'm Monica Ricks in the Bloomberg newsroom. Here are some of the stories we're watching. Lindsey Graham, the South Carolina senator and foreign policy hawk who went from a Donald Trump skeptic to one of the president's strongest allies, has died at 71. Bloomberg's Ed Kalegi has details.
The cause of death was a brief and sudden illness. Graham's office said this in a post on X that offered no additional details. Emergency personnel responded to a call for cardiac arrest at Graham's Capitol Hill home. NBC reported this, citing police scanner audio. He was in Kyiv as recently as Friday before returning to Washington, where he was scheduled to appear on television Sunday morning. Seeking a 5th Senate term, Graham had been locked in a tight battle for re-election in the typically conservative southern state with Democrat Annie Andrews, a pediatrician. He won his primary election on June 9th. Ed Kalegi, Bloomberg Radio.
President Trump remembered Graham this morning on CNN.
What a terrible loss it is. He was a great politician. He was a natural. There are very few of them. He was a natural politician. Got along with everybody. When he didn't, he was very tough. He was a tough cookie too, but he got along with everybody.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune talked about Graham's long and dedicated service. And Republican Governor Henry McMaster of South Carolina said he's devastated, calling Graham the fiercest of fighters. He'll appoint a temporary replacement to fill Graham's Senate seat through January. Meantime, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear has renewed his call for Republican Senator Mitch McConnell to release information about his health after he was hospitalized last month. McConnell hasn't been seen publicly since, and Beshear says he wants to end all the, quote, crazy speculation. Last week, McConnell's office claimed his condition was improving, but hasn't provided updates. For the 3rd time in a week, U.S. forces struck